1. Zentralblatt for Occultism, 6th year, 1912 to 1913, Part 3. Printed pages 145 to 219. This reading edition continues directly from Part 2. Repeated journal headers, page numbers, archive footers, advertisements, and most bibliographic or footnote clutter have been omitted. Because the source is an image-only Fracture-era scan, this is a cleaned reading translation, rather than a diplomatic scholarly transcription. 2. Forcing Prana 4 into its ministries in order to exercise effects on the elemental region, 321, for good or evil. But just as well is this possible for a man who, without being initiated, without the laws of I know, and without special will, so to speak randomly, under the appropriate conditions, does the same thing that on the basis of these facts, and on the basis of these phenomena, all of them can be explained without complicity, from the simplest to the most incomprehensible, according to the occult axiom. We above, so below, n.e.g. at the prayer or curse. Let us take the much controversial current problem of the Winchell root, which at present takes up so much the thoughts and interest of the scholars and laymen, that even an association for clarification of the wish-rod question has formed as one of the simplest. It suffices for an adept to reach out his hand, and the odd which emanates from the fingertips by thoughts, with the tendency to interact with the aura emanations of any subterranean water or coal veins, in order to immediately indicate where the vein in question lies. A wanderer unconsciously does exactly the same thing, only he uses a rod as an aid to concentrate the rays emanating from his hands at the tip of the rod and around the make interactions eye-catching. If his thoughts are not in the matter, the rod does not beat. From easily comprehensible grids, however, the process is difficult to follow, and even less prove. On the other hand, this is quite easily possible with the phenomena which are analogous in every respect in experiments with the sidereal pendulum, described in detail in Unveiled, the dynamic circle. The pendulum fastened to a thread, hangs on a ledge, and comes into any body, metal, stone, or body, to float. Organic at first, it stands completely still, but soon the bar is passed over with the hand, and the person concerned has his thoughts on the matter. So the pendulum swings, according to the laid body, according to the most varied, in a circle around the right or left. But if the person concerned turns his thoughts away from the pendulum, or takes his hand away from the bar, then the pendulum also ceases to swing. If, on the other hand, he influences his thoughts by his will, and decides that the pendulum of another but in the unintended application of spiritual powers presuppose that they have already awakened in this man, even if it may occur that he has no clear idea of these and their immense activity. The Editor. The experiment crucis is executed in the manner that 3 pendulums on the same strip Iber, of 3 different, correspondingly selected bodies, oscillate in a transverse direction, a longitudinal direction, and in a circle, whereby the end result is that proof has been provided that it is neither a self-exchange, nor that unconscious muscle twitches or imperceptible airflows cause vibrations. Rather, it is a matter of truth, and obligated to understand that at least 3 kinds of fuels are in play. The law with which the pendulum Iber vibrates the different substances in each conscientious direction makes it clear that the aether body, or the aura of the underlying structure, 1, 2, 3, is de-energized into the category of prana 4 of the pendulum fuel, which obedient determines this direction of vibration. Since the pendulum does not oscillate without production, proves that a force which de-energizes the human organism must be added. Since the human being must focus his attention on the pendulum mubi, indicates that the relevant force belongs to the category of manas, 5, mubi, the thinker. Since the lawful will vibrating force can be changed into an unlawful mode, it makes it clear that a third force belonging to a higher category power, the will of man, is involved. For an animal, the organism either beats the pendulum swing or the rod, because it lacks the higher manas influenced by buddhi. 6. The result of our investigation, then, is the presentation of a decisive interaction between the aether body, the soul of lifeless matter, and the astral body, the vehicle of the soul of man. The soul of inanimate matter, as we have shown, consists chiefly of the various blind forces which, belonging to the category of prana, 4, emanate from the sun and planets, arrays of the highest intelligence in the central sun, or evolutionary impulses endowed with conscious abilities and tendencies, which under certain conditions they were mechanically attracted to other sympathetically vibrating fuels, part decomposed, converted and refined to higher categories of combining fuels. In this way, the plant kingdom evolves from the mineral kingdom, by the higher modification of prana 4, the animal kingdom, and finally the human being, thereby joining Buddhi 6. As already indicated, not only every stone species and every metal species, but also every plant species, every animal species, and every human being, individual, under the special planetary influence which had its own planetary influence only of this species or this human individual, which influenced their development more or less decisively. The fuels and tendencies under the same planetary influence always tend to nestle together, which causes not only a change in the aura, but also in the physical body of the respective entities. This change may be more or less perceptible in the lifeless body under certain circumstances, while in the living body it may be partly as pleasure, partly as displeasure, or even without a certain impression. This will immediately explain to you who may be felt. Apparitions observed by the questioner W.H. and published in the November issue, 1911, of the Zentralblatt S. 318, according to which certain precious and semi-precious stones, ruby, sapphire, amethyst, etc., their color change depending on the people who wear them, while on the other hand, also sometimes in the present cases, there is probably no doubt that sympathetically tuned auras, i.e. auras under the same planetary influence, on the one hand have a beneficial effect on the person in question, on the other hand, the brilliance of the stone increases, and vice versa with unsympathetic auras. In any case, it would be interesting to carry out these inquiries. Then there are the minerals of the earth. In the plant kingdom, the growth or the refinement of matter and decay of the same is a complete mechanical process, depending on the predetermined ordering of the highest intelligence, Atma 7. If the situation changes as soon as Manas 5 becomes active in the animal organism, or more or less decisively participates in the development of the same. The higher the intelligence of the species, the more self-determining and independent overheadline individuals become, and the more willingly they are able to adapt their organism to the prevailing conditions of the environment. This is the case at the highest point of Homo sapiens, the summit point of physical development, where through the further influence of the Buddhi, 6, to be approached, the intelligence becomes capable of development up to infinity, and free will emerges in its highest potency, whereby the human being is then enabled, according to his aura, to, so Mr. Forblum himself admits, that the adaptation and the willingness to organize must, under the prevailing conditions of his environment, presuppose independent will, guided by an appropriate intelligence. Plant psychology, of which R. France is the main representative, comes to the same rags on the basis of their experimental experiments, to look at organisms, because it is wrong, growth, adaptability, etc. to explain a plant as a mechanical process, desire to model, to purify and refine the same more and more from the lower principles, or not. And now we have arrived at the point where we can begin our investigations, to make clear the modus operandi in the pervasive phenomena and effects. We have seen that the man in the pendulum test aura, i.e. the etheric or odic emanation, can be influenced by thought power in such a way that an interaction occurs with the aether body, i.e. the etheric emanations of the outgoing body, whereby the pendulum vibrates in a certain lawful manner. The ability to change these vibrations. These facts form the key to the slogan of most of the puzzles in question for us. It is obvious that the same forces are at play in the winged rod as in the pendulum, and also that the rod, whether of metal or wood, just as the pendulum is only an aid around which the fingers of the human emanating fluidimonous current through a spike, and in this way to make the senses perceptible, as well as a stone, a winch rod or a pendulum, can be swung with a human aura, so that depending on the nature of this aura emanation, or depending on the fact that it is impregnated with certain tendencies by thought or willpower, certain effects. So this is also possible with a table, and if a number of people in the dark put their fingers on a lay tabletop and have their thoughts with otherwise passive behavior in the matter, then the table is first so much drunk with human sensitive and dense aura that it like cloud appears enveloped, becomes visible. B. The thoughts of all those involved are directed to the fact that the table is inclined towards a certain side. This will also happen under normal circumstances. But since, as is well known, the human aura consists not only of aether substances belonging to the physical plane and to the category of prana, 4, but also of manas, 5, and buddhi, 6 rays are mixed together. So it is thereby possible for the most diverse astral beings to get outside in it. So far, so mysterious phenomena emerge in the séance room. Continuation to follow. Comparisons. Reichenbach, Diodisha Loa, Leipzig, Max Altman. The big question is only who or what are those astral beings? Why should only elemental beings, and not the souls of the departed, carve such opportunities to manifest themselves? Indeed, we see, like recent occult research, and precisely those which are of outstanding importance, heading is being driven increasingly forced to use the spiritist hypothesis, the scriptures, as the most correct. Further postmortem issues by W. 5. T. Stead. By Ludwig Deinhard. The English Weekly Light prints in its number of June 15, 1912, from the Progressive Thinker N. of May 18, a salutation given by Mrs. Cora L. V. Tappan Richmond to a circle of English spiritualists, which we may probably regard as a postmortem movement of W. T. Stead's. The singing of a hymn, it is reported, took on a changed expression of this lady's face, and she began to address the spiritualist communalist present. Dear friends, I am not unknown in your circle, but I am not a hero. Men are all naturally more or less cowardly, that is, they are afraid of something. I was not afraid of the other world, so few of me before many. But we all shudder at that unknown something that is called death, what he will bring us, what we will feel, and where we shall meet him. Deraber can only tell us how, when the experience will clarify. Most people, this transition seems terrible. I myself have always conceived life on earth and the life beyond as a connected whole. I do not think that when I left England at that time I had any foreboding of what was to come. No one warned me, do not go on this vessel. I had to go on an appointment, and so I had to go. The ship pleased me because of its grove, which is towering all the other ships. And why not take the best opportunity, even when it comes to going to the other world? When the collision took place that night, I knew about it at once. We men then spoke among themselves. My meg was, one should not be so scared. And then when I wanted to go down to my cabin, I met people everywhere who were scared. The following statements, which appear to be based on Stead's inspiration, contain many things which will be of interest to the readers, who admit the possibility of such an action by the deceased. Whoever denies this possibility stubbornly will do better to ignore the following. Hence it is not addressed to skeptics, but to followers of the spirit hypothesis. I remind the reader that during his lifetime Stead possessed the gift of automatic writing. And yet Stead, following a warning of his mind, had Kitty the Eye know he would die in the collision of a ship. But I did this without thinking that I was doing something unusual. This is the real danger of this time. It was shortly after midnight. I myself was ready to die. Many will be there at once to receive me. I did not doubt that. But what would become of those who feared death, who knew nothing of a life beyond, and whose faith would fail altogether in the hour of danger? These must as far as possible be trodden, calmed, and supported, in order to be able to endure in their bodies for a time. When you seek to serve others, you forgive yourself. Indeed, there was also little time left to ride, because on this gigantic ship goods few provisions. The thought is made to meet such an eventuality. There was still no real danger. But when it became clearer from the behavior of the ship's officers that there was a serious danger, that they were preparing to save the women and children, I said to myself, you must be the take people down in the intermediate deck. The Caduite passengers are better trained. They have more knowledge, they are better able to master themselves, and they understand better what to expect, while the fellow humans down there probably know nothing. So I now devoted my time, as far as I remember, to those who were ignorant, and at least sought to comfort those to whom I could make myself understood. Unfortunately, I could speak no other language than the English, which the foreigners only badly, or not at all, where I understood. Nevertheless, I tried to comfort them too. I made them understand as best they could that there was no danger to real life. Then I went into my not to sleep, but to establish the connection which has always formed my refuge, the connection with the sensual world and my invisible friends. And now I received by automatic writing the first warning, that is the message that the ship would sink. When all those who had not slept had learned that the ship was going down, a terrible lament began. Also Michiiber shuddered at the thought of the inflowing water. Will it take a long time? I asked myself. Will the Zumglick Wardies dock not the fighting long? XC? When all that could be done was done, then came the order to me, the cry of those wrestling with death. This is a good thing. They know nothing of spiritualism. Len was terrible, and then came death. Air down into the dark tide, a feeling of drowning, and I woke up, like one who wakes up from a terrible dream. A son, my son, yes, it was he who first came to meet me, was one of the rescuers who came from that realm where lifeboats were missing, the rescuer who had now found me. 7. I repeat, an intrusion of water, a gargle, bubble, and noise, and I was awakened to full consciousness of life. I still saw people wrestling around me, still thinking I was helping them. But when I saw the form of the no-sun in the midst of it, I knew for certain that I was no longer one body was located. I then tried to assist these uncorporated people with all the force of their dependents in the lifeboats, who wanted to cling to their wives, skiers, and middlemen. My son said that we should rid them of their fate, but I said, no, let us see what we can do for them. So we stayed for hours and hours, oceans, where the ship went down, followed the lifeboats, and ran to help those who always wanted to avoid leaving the body, even though they had made it in reality, without becoming aware of it. Since at the Garrison Unglick the ship's officers ifed no fault, this stands Firmicalbert Zweifel. Similarly, the shipsman has done everything that could be done under these circumstances. The only thing missing, as was clearly evident, was the necessary number of lifeboats. Presumably this was the main mistake one had committed. When then the great dawn had opened up to me, the Morgensex eines andern Lebens, Dacke mein Gelubbermich, wie wenn nicht aus, in a state of Alpdricken to a state of peace, from a prison to freedom, awakened where. It seemed to me as if a glittering morning had opened up there after the night of the earthly, as if flying had suddenly preceded me, in the place of hitherto touching, flowers and frying, the buds of silence and darkness. Enstel Bischerigen K. Who was able to describe the indescribable? I could, my son's companion I barely. But I said, no, we want to do what we can to donate help here. Then the helpers streamed out of the invisible worlds, in order to assist the decomposers who were not yet aware of it. Maybe they had already taken off their bodies. About this son of Stead's finds more details in the June issue. All those who clung to their bodies, or who followed the frail vehicles in which their followers sat, into the ocean. What aggravated them all those who had been hurled so completely unprepared, so completely against their will, into the spirit world. Consolation and help are given. Everywhere there is a call to help others. No one enters the higher world without one or more of them being willing to meet him and bless him. Many die alone and forsaken on earth, but none enter the other world. The world, without it, will be welcome. 8. It is a bitter experience which we all pass through in mortal life, to rub oneself away from a friend who goes to the other world, even when we know that he goes to life and not to death. Non-minor bitterness for one who has to go unprepared, for whom perhaps only a few moments were available, to go to this transition, and to separate himself from those close to him. Such a one does not want to go over, but he must. It then depends entirely on the extent to which one is self-controlled and has inner balance. on the extent to which one is prepared, or on the extent to which one shudders. At first the drowned could not see who came to meet them. They did not recognize their friends in the hereafter who were waiting for them to raise them up. They turned away, unwilling to leave those to whom they were bound by the bonds of affection. If then the Glick had desired that husband and wife should remain united in death, which was the case several times, then this great joy felt that this terrible shock had not separated them. Wherever I can find a hand or a brain through which something of the meaning of this new communication of life can be found, I will gladly make use of it. With thanks, I use the opportunity here offered me to pay my tribute both to my fellow passengers and to the officers of the sinking ship, noting that in the case of the sinking of the ship and the loss of so many valuable human lives can only be considered for two causes, namely the Ibergross trust placed in the ship and the inadequate existing lifeboats. If one correctly estimates the value of human life, then one will always provide for sufficient safety rules. The saviors who come from the heavenly world, these divine messengers, are always ready to help and save. It is difficult to reach from here those in earthly life, where so many resistances are to be overcome. It is always the wall of ignorance against which we have to fight. Often we try to reach our loved ones on earth. My own followers know about these things approximately as much as I knew in earthly life. They do not know how to be oriented so far that the gates to this world have not remained completely closed to them. If I had done a great deal on earth, I would have done a great deal. I did not agree with everything, as Mr. Carnegie thinks of it, with his ideas a general dissent and a peace at any price. I thought more of one who would be based on the law. Whenever I had the opportunity to speak at Fürsten or at the last Peace Congress, or changed it with the representatives of the various governments, I always demanded that one should eliminate the causes that destroyed the wars. I did not ask of Great Britain or of any other country that it should abort. But these are not the things that I will go into more detail today. Talking about peace will find opportunities for another time. However, I may still say a lot of things today. Here we do not need to drag an earthly body with us. Here there are no weak eyes which do not limit our eyesight by the senses at all. I am limiting eye-conscious in the few weeks which I have spent here. If I have meanwhile lapsed time in my contact with you, right G, to have learned more than in my previous life, to answer the questions which have occupied me more quickly than in my previous life, because the answer to these questions lies in this state, this life itself. If we are freed from the compulsion of the senses, then we are obedient to listen to the intellect and interpret things with our mind. Our earthly voice does not reach very far. The more so, but I think our thoughts. If you were in Chicago, I could send you one thought just as well as if you were in another Loos von London wear it, and I could be equally rapid in spirit. Zentralblatt for Occultismus, vi.jarg, like in another room. Space and time, all these earthly restrictions dwindle with our body. Here we have, so to speak, too much space, if we do not adapt to this new state. I have to think of a little girl in London who was once taken to a countryside. When it arrived outside, it began to cry. It had never come out of London, and had never seen anything but Straben, but here outside it saw nothing but grass and flowers and trees and birds. Then the good child began to cry, and someone asked, "What do you have, my child? Don't you like it here?" Then she answered, "I'm so scared here. It's too much room here." That is exactly what we are doing here. Space is almost too large in the spiritual world. It is so wonderfully large that the inhabitants of this world, in spite of their innumerable multitude, do not hinder each other from moving. Therefore the miracle that things are experienced here without being told to one, and that questions are answered here without saying them. How often have we all asked the question, where then the other world? The answer is, let your hulla fall, take the mask of the flesh away, and the answer is there. You should actually know that answer. She has been taught many times. Prophets, poets, Wise men and philosophers have taught you. But you do not waive it. You are terrified of this world because of its great size. When you look out into the blue sky for a while, you become accustomed to this sight. And when you are enclosed in a cellar or in a cave and appear, then they will gradually increase you. The same happened to the miners with whom I occasionally spoke. The sight of the heaven did not seem to make an impression on them. They came away empty. Do not be afraid that you will leave yourselves alone if you are going to the supersensible world. Never has a poor, abandoned human child ever come here without an inhabitant of this world preparing to take care of him, nor before he left the body. Beings watch as they walk around their dying friends, as they have tried to assist them, though completely unnoticed. It is in accordance with the highest law of mind that one can spiritually reach who one wants to reach. Spirit is not disturbed by any device that opens the messages. Then they will be sent to their intended recipients. Spark telegrams of the mind always reach their destination. I smoked here to ask questions and to pay attention to incoming antennas, to learn everything I wanted to know. The antorts always flew to me like throngs of birds, carried by the visible flares of thought. Responses emanating from Juliet, from dear friends and family members. All of them were there, waiting for me. Was it my first question to them? They seemed to have expected it and said yes. My next question in question was, why didn't you tell me before? They answered, it was not good for you. Why not? Your time was up. Do you want to do this? It was my old skeptical intellect that asked this question. Are there limits to every life? WIB. And what about the couples whom death has separated? Do you think so too? We mean it. And Juliet said, if chance were to take place in the universe, then we had no osmos, but a chaos. And so it will probably not have been a coincidence that brought me here, but purposeful intention. It may be that I was not quite mature, yet not fully developed. But the time was, and if I came during my earthly life, it fell to me, by which I could turn myself up if I was aware of insight. I am very glad about this privilege. I am also very glad that humanity has not only learned from its best, but also from its worst side. When we come here, we first learn what we are worth. We bring nothing but our thoughts. I have not even brought my pen with me. My body is gone, my mind-brain on which I can act. He is still as alive as ever, yet just as receptive for everything that interested humanity requires. And if my son had stayed on the Ben, who, when he died, had only really cherished his life, and who was destined to carry out all my life's work, then my son interrupted me just now and told me, why, father, since I came into this world here, I have in fact already lived 1,000 lives and have already been influenced by men. Julia Ames, Stead's old girlfriend who died 18 years before him and on whose talk he spoke the Biro Julia Grindete. Our thoughts go out into the world and find out who they're destined for and to which they fit. Julia thought that we should take our office, which has hitherto flown her name, here in this world that is embarrassed, and see what we can do to produce humanity, so that the change which it calls death, life does not change. This awakening, the feeling of joy that this morning brings, the forgetting of the way that flowed here, all the new insight that was snipped away with it, the dawning of a life full of wonderful possibilities, all this is for each of us, and I will use every opportunity offered to me to point this out to humanity. One should not talk about death and not about dead people. One should not be bowed down by grief, not say, oh, those who are gone. I have, when I talk to people about this, sometimes they had the impression that they did not want their deceased relatives to live on. For example, if a deceased person has wronged him or her, a woman has lost, and he may remarry, but the idea that he or she lives after death may cause great embarrassment. But do not let yourself be rid of such thoughts. In this spirit world, there is no jealousy. Favorable opportunities to make oneself meaningful are always recognized here, and the great strength of spiritual love lies precisely in the fact that it is selfless. And now learning how to work together and shaking hands with each other. Come to meet us kindly. Do not put us aside, do not call us dead, and do not say of us, we were no longer considered for humanity. We still belong just as good to it as before. We may demand you, not hinder you, nibble you, not harm you, if we give you knowledge of our newly awakened life. Whether you leave your body, surrounded by friends and praying flowers, or bristle of the floods of the sea, or from shivering flames, found life. I thank you. I thank the friends in the spirit world who helped me to give you these few broken words through their chosen instrument. If I can, I'll come back in a while. I'm W.T. Stead. However my name will be in the heavenly world, I don't know. Only so much do I know that I'm not dead, but alive, in the full sense of the local life. Neither birth, nor life, nor death can prevent the soul from fulfilling its good intentions. Insofar as this salutation, which corresponds entirely to the way of thinking and the character of personality, Aaron is accustomed to strictly logical thinking, which may have to expose some ran. The closing sentence seems to be a quotation from a Glish writer. As far as the transfer from the narrow original is concerned, I have allowed myself, for the sake of greater clarity, with certain freedoms, in order to reproduce the content of the telegram-like short original as precisely as possible. In the English text, the word spirit world corresponds to the word spirit world. Perhaps it would be more correct to place this expression soul world here, since according to occultism, the deceased first enters the soul world and only breathe into the spirit world. But the English spiritualism power of knowledge does not make this difference. Speak only of the spirit world, how this whole address moves entirely in the conceptions of English spiritualism. Remarkable in this address is the passage where a started at is not completed, where Stead suddenly stops in his speech, apparently because his son, of whom he is just talking, Plutz, falls into his word. The son, who has already touched the earthly, corrects here the father, who is still earthly biased. What is particularly interesting to me is what is said here about space and the change which these standards of intellect suffer in the transition to the Iberian world. According to this, the view of time is completely eliminated there, since it dissolves itself in the view of space. What we encounter here as a neighbor of the Inda-Ribbers inliche Weltzubeinander, more precisely, to a hitherto unknown space dimension, which we first missed to adapt to. So you will probably find the right, what Stedeber the wonderful grobe space of that Welt Albert, who still fluctuates in the latter. Whether this address may really be understood as the inspiration of the deceased Stead, who still doubts, is scientifically verifiable. That with such mediumatic reactions often, although not always, have to do with certain first deceased, I highly recommend the peeling set on, time, and noise, are modalities of our knowledge bound to the material, or especially Kontingewiesenheit, hat, diem, of the American scientist Dr. James Hyslop, one of the scholars who is very well stricken in these problems. Unlike Hyslop and some English researchers, such as Professor W. Barrett, our German scholars and their followers seem to have recently joined together to form a ring that makes front against the use of the spirit hypothesis, while French researchers still cannot get out of it. The hypothesis is simply absurd. Should a change occur in this respect in the foreseeable future, then, if we take the above statements in the sense in which they want to be taken up, we will hardly go astray with the assumption that behind this change also the deceased W.T. Stead stecken dürfte among others. Practical Psychometry. From Pract Arts, G. Reinhardt. At the same time that modern spiritualism was begun by the Nocturnes of the Fox brothers, and modern Theosophy by the appearance of Mrs. Blavatsky, a foundation has been laid in another field of practical psychology. This was done by the Handbook of Psychometry of the American professor of medicine, Dr. J. 13 Rhodes Buchanan. A critique of the value of its meaning cannot of course be made on the basis of the current scientific school. From the secret scientific his horoscope would be in question. But his birth dates are not available to me now. Without criticism must therefore be made later on occasion, to discuss his position of the major planets at the time of the first version of the new thought. But it must be noticed as peculiar that most of the large planets were in the scientific signs at the time of the autumn of 1842. So Buchanan also tells that he got his method in the pursuit of longer scientific studies, but under the direct influence of an accidental acquaintance of a very sensitive person, a clergyman, who had pointed him to his accidentally observed fine tactile feeling. In later life, Buchanan has remained scientific. Some of these writings have been published in German translation. Like Hans Freimark, compare his writing Über die Okkultistische Bewegung. His picture has been published in the album of the newspaper Light of Truth, Columbus, Ohio, among other occultists, media, and psychologists, and shows a man of detailed character in mental abilities, goodwill, and objectivity, to whom one cannot trust in advance. Incidentally, his most objective psychometric experimental object, his wife, has been a good medium in the spiritistic sense, however, especially somnambule, so that he cannot be reproached for not having practically known the spiritistic phenomena. The picture of Mrs. Buchanan smears the title page of Psychometry, cell site. My feelings and a certain amount of criticism are, in my opinion, the main part of this face. Since these lines are especially intended to give prospective psychometers a guide to quickly and surely rub off practical psychometry, everything secondary should be dispensed with. It comes from the underconsciousness, through spirits, through suggestion, the power of imagination, through the mediation of cosmic forces in the astrological sense, whether they are only or partially instinctive feelings of an increased nature. The main thing is that method of psychometry. Only after mastery of these will each self-assessment constellation, to what extent they are subject to combine methods of practical psychology. In any case, there's a great deal of room for maneuver left, according to the individual investment dislocation. In short words, means psychometry. Recognition of the impacts on the individual, even in the waking state, according to their effective values, especially with regard to the life of feeling, psycho. Who is particularly capable of feeling psychometrically? In order not to introduce authors, after the experience is personal, it is claimed that everyone is more or less empowered. Natural occasional psychometry of non-permanent and subordinate relationships. Ordinary life does not separate itself at all. The great attention of psychometric phenomena in general expands the soul life in an unexpected way. Finally, anyone who wants only energetically, especially under ginty aspects in the astrological sense, clear and psychometric reaching stumbling blocks. However, it is best that only pronounced plants for psychometry are maintained. Something else does not correspond to the laws of personal feeling and the laws of development. These are especially strongly sensitive persons who succeed impeccably and quickly in the first Buchanan experiments still to be mentioned in the course of this treatise. Here is also the publishing house of Max Altmann in Leipzig, published by Freiherrn von Reichenbach. Whereas Sensitiven, Anfihir, the decisive wink, contains self-knowledge of the sensitive. The large number of so-called naturopaths who are active in the treatment of the sick without medical training have their main strength in their natural faculties and due to the continuing dependence on their own observations, where psychometry is used for the most part. In the future, through a more conscious application of the same and methodical practice, a satisfactory state will occur in these relations for all parts, doctors, cures, and the sick. Buchanan in his manual describes psychometry as the dawn of a new culture. It does not mean that everyone by the new science can open up a new outlook for itself, but that science, the exact research, the results of the psychometers will work for itself, and that Baal branches of knowledge will grasp the fundamental value of the psychic. Experimental subjects who have this method Ferdiinen, Knowledge America has this to the extent available. Buchanan Denton began with a 3-volume work under the geological and paleontological studies are elaborated psychometrically under the impression of excavated relics of several high-grade sensitives. Unfortunately, it is precisely this branch of science that is the least uniformly accessible, and so, to my knowledge, is this work on science. A detailed description of this, without traces drawn. Highly interesting psychometric descriptions long past. Also, the description of the planets on the time is to follow farther. Psychometric bases are very interesting, and at least as credible as the various other occult utterances about these relations. Also, these representations will later be examined in detail and critically, especially with Rücksicht on the psychometric practice. In which direction it will be most likely possible to produce the science of the reality of psychic potencies will later be shown by individual examples. In any case, I must not depart from my well-founded opinion that the path of development is well fixed, and that it is only necessary to observe our national life in order to recognize the driving forces. Psychometry, character descriptions, prediction of small events of daily life. Even the medical psychometry is a serious factor. Etry and observations on other psychometers, that I am concerned here with an evolving psychic science, must also have an intriguing effect on the school. The psychometric abilities are for the most part innate. Nixton Slopsy House den Gebietshoroskop, this ability to calculate, so the times can be predetermined when a special force and special success is to be expected. In general, the Jupiter is too unintentional in normal dispositions. Mercury has a rough influence when it is well aspected. The ascendant must have no real aspects, a pathological constitution, and corresponding constellations are unintentional, since the development of these pathological conditions is determined by unintentional aspects, and no space is phenoid psychometric intrigues. However, the Saturn R psychometer is important. It represents the strong psychic, more lower forces, but to the realization mancher panamenatigend, at least preemptive. The point for occultism is present in aspects of Uranus and Neptune. To deal with the details of the prognosis has probably no purpose. I must emphasize that for the development of psychometric forces, not only Ut, but also bad directions are valuable. Quadratures and bad irradiations act like a purifying fire, which brings the delmetal of spiritual knowledge to light. However, as in the world, only an individual treatment of the horoscope is in a position to determine the details. A psychometer, as well as a psychic medium, of every suggester and occultist should have his horoscope told or set, in order thereby to determine details as to how he can use a personal system most favorably. The physiognomy and chirognomy, among others, also serves excellently in recognition psychometric systems. For general psychometry, graceful, delicately constructed compositions with a fine expression of the face are suitable, which are partly as thinking, but where only an exactly corresponding expression is found by astrological values. A pure sentient natural, thinking emperor, is hard to find. It is to be deduced both from the Brightvie and the Langschadel. Incidentally, it is quite corresponding to the laws of psychometry that such people in a cunning environment are the materialistic thought-style repugnances and the greatest enemies of occultism, although they apply occult laws daily. Exclusively money-making sensitive brother in her out somnambulan, who achieves the most in business life through his personal influence, but fearfully averse to occultism. But scatteredness, strong inclination for a good table and the pleasures of Venus, increased sense of work, are mainly the inhibitory factors, in addition to self-suggestion, which prevent such sensitivity from breaking through psychometric inclinations. The movement and feeding people, mostly long and broad-skinned persons, are again brought to psychometry in another way. Here they are accumulations of psychic power in the form of one-sided faculties that lead to psychometry. In the first class of the general sensitives, which Ibrigens in general cannot be quite equated with the sensitives of Reichenbach, are thus inhibitory negative character traits and dispositions. In the second, more positive, driving, e.g. ideal sense, construction and music sense, observation, sign and form sense, benevolence, and the sense for the childish simple, the child love of the phrenologists, but especially a well-developed imitation instinct. Psychometers to speak in the course of later embodiments. I still have to notice, above remarks, they are just claiming the value personal observations, neither directly feels psychometric or is gained by a kind of collective psychometry, by several similar persons being mentally united, and then the overall impression is 16 expressed. The manuscript proves the special disposing characters, The palms are usually soft, the fingers a philosophical or canestral form, and it is good if alongside the other hand developed, and without crossings, the Mercury and Jupiter mountains is powerfully lined. The heart line should be strong, long, if possible with a fork after the Jupiter mountain, according to the importance of the heart as receiving organ for telepathic forces. A connection line between Mercury and Moonberg gives strong psychometric imaginations. Also, a connection line with the headline is Günstig. Intrinsically, a form of psychometry is a special nasal hiding, various straight flats. This is particularly evident in Davis, also in the panel media Mrs. Lake and Pepper, in Emerson, etc. This pure form, the direct takeover of psychic, is in my EM, best suited to encourage the individual organs to determine the laws by which psychometrics proceed, and which also affect the many combined forms of psychometrics, such as clairvoyance, hellhorning, test writing, thought transmission, etc. apply. The following are the basic first experiments. Buchanan's are reproduced because they are the pure form of the psychometrics, are typical, and then further development, Buchanan's method of being flown through on the hand of his manuals of psychometry. To be continued. Protected healing methods against snake bid and bib of great animals, collected and communicated by G.W. Surya. Continued. The areas exposed from the upper skin are now moistened 3 days in a row, 5 times a day, with the freshly pre-prebin juice from the spirea root, and internally handed Gavin Vergerbert, as, stay again not said. The result of this treatment is that the traumas disappear, the spasmodic collapsing of the pharynx resumes, and that I form a fine scratch-like rash on the whole body, the is itch. The appetite returns again, the chair becomes regular big, takes place 2 to 3 times a day. The urine becomes darker, forms a strong ediment. The sick person regains his freer mood. So, a BAM 32 days the sick person seems to have been established. One must not let oneself be misled by the apparent healing, but the do not interrupt until the 60th or 62nd day, because only after this one certainly has to confess the outbreak of water shyness. If, on the other hand, the water shyness is already geom to the outbreak, then one has to take the following treatment. The sick person must be in a temperature of 28 degrees Réaumur. It is rubbed 3 times a day with spirea vinegar all over the body. It must be rubbed unheard of the pulling pavement along the whirl column. The patient is to be given 5 times a day from the fresh root juice Clistier. He gets around the neck compresses, which are drunk with juice of the spirea, and dried according to Mabgabe. Visi, renewed. Usually, the patient becomes quieter afterwards, and now nem are passed every 3 hours 2 Eblofeldes root juice of the spirea. For potion, he gets the same honey-stained juice. With a silent treatment, improvement occurred after 16 hours, and recovery followed after 3 days. The treatment by DIB of infected animals, according to the method Les Dr. 17 Melzenevich, is the following. Depending on the Grobater animal, such a 1/4 pound of the freshly crushed spirea root is best mixed with the feed knit oats. Dogs, it is best brought in thick porridge of oats. This treatment is continued for 2 months. In summer, the animals are bathed at Grober Hitzefleibig, and note the analogous effect that also occurs in Boundschatism. Warm is remarkably also in the case of cure of syphilis, according to doctors aged a Hauptfaktor. After this, the whole herb of the Spirea ulmariae will be treated. With a pink observance of all these regulations, one can be completely sure that the animals will be spared the water shyness. In this way we, for discerning readers, had inferiorly expounded the healing effect of the Spirea ulmariae, and it would have been significant, this to add medicinal plant Ernok, because the same in Volksmundmann many names feared as Subspier, Modelsee, Käsbarfkraut, or Wormkraut, Wiesenkonigin, bloodweed root, meadowweed, milkraut, swamp spraying and weeding. The Spirea ulmariae is also in Deutschland heimisch, and usually found on damp ground. These medicinal plant grows to 1 meter high, has interrupted plumage divided, lower white cotton leafers, and white, unified slits to irregular dolphins. However, it is advisable to use only the wild Spirea almeriae for healing purposes, because some varieties are also grown in the garden. Further proven remedies against water shyness. Although the Spirea almeriae, as we have just heard, has a certainty of action both against fresh bub wounds of mad animals and against already erupted water shyness, nichets, and is hardly reached, let alone encountered by any remedy therein. We want the sake of completeness, some strange remedies have been found, which have also been well preserved against the consequences of the bite of great animals. An unnamed German doctor around 1790 had the following report über his observations concerning the cure of rabies in Hungary published. The same was published in the Großer Tagblatt by Hungary. Here on land, often many people of great dogs, but among the meanest people there are different people bitten. This dangerous disease can be cured in an easy way. These doctors cut the patient under the tongue, the two frogs in two, whereupon the blood is churned out with a wooden spatula, and this operation once a week, until on this wound, however, after it has been well washed out with urine, they place onion, boiled in honey, and continue with it until it heals. Wild medicinal plants are always to be preferred to those cultivated artificially. Each wild plant preserves its individuality, and therefore also its virtue and powers far better than a kinest-grown plant of the same genus. The culture does not only soften people, but also plants. It makes them more gentle and splendid, but at the expense of their hidden powers and natural specific qualities. So much for protection against this disease. However, the same also applies against the real water shyness, and only one must notice, as soon as the disease on these degree has increased, the frogs are 18 very swollen, and when cut open, small short wormer with the blood come to the forehead. If at last the veins are repeatedly stroking yon the poisoned blood, and cleansed of the worms, so also I have been in this country for 4 years, and during this time, despite many misfortunes, I have not yet heard of a single example. The patient on whom this operation was performed would have died. There was also, among other things, a private from a begging dog's bit, and as he belonged to my district, I made a loan. He refused my help, confided in such a country doctor, as these people are called, and was cured in the mentioned way so glicklich, that he now the perfect health genius. Such a country doctor, by the way, does not like to admit spectators when he performs this operation. However, I believe that what I have just indicated is sufficient in order also in Germany. The matter is important, and perhaps only utribitola bb. As for me, after so many never-do glittery cures on land, I see no reason to doubt the Utin success. This cure of rabies by cutting open the frogs of Magheitigen doctors, probably as medical superstitions. We recall, however, that in Berlin, about 100 years ago, under the penalty of 50 Reichstalers, it was forbidden to possess dogs whose worm cartilage or worms, not of self-authorized worm cutters, were removed. This surgical removal of the worm cartilage, or the worm var, i.e. dogs, was then used as a precautionary rule against outbreak of watchdog rage. We may, however, bring another conscience to the effect that lie Froschedern under the tongue in some connection with Darrell's arts and occultists. And bury him to Lehrwasserscheustand, recommended in his 1870 publication, Ormed Unfill Zimpel, Medical Home Treasure under N, Water Shy at First Place Remedies. The product bought by the Easter Austrian government by the school teacher Joseph Allier on the Karsten near Trieste, which is also recommended by all doctors, consists of the powder of the Chrysenzian in Bray der Tee. First is better washing. Dr. Zimpel then adds another 10 remedies against the water scare. We want only the most evidently preserved of them. Specify means. Eeks in recent times the following infallible means of a Forsterson Saxon published. Man was skedier wundes afort with the sharpest wine vinegar, which one warms, and with something water verdine that. Then the wound to connect with acidum 1, acidum muriaticum, hydrochloric acid, or hydrochloric acid. 50-year-old this means never invented, neither among men nor cattle, lacking to bring about success. Unfortunately, it is not clear from this recipe how strongly diluted the salt acid should be used, because it should be taken undistorted, is probably excluded. This also emerges from another means which Simple mentions just before. After the Académie Française in Paris, the bite is said to be with a resolution of RP acid. Hydrochloroc GTTV, solve in aqua distill GTT 100, i.e., either dropwise or by means of a compress NAB. Dr. 19 Zimpel seems to have paid even more attention to the treatment of water scarcity, because in his latest healing system, publisher Homeopathic Central Pharmacy, Göppingen, Württemberg, he gives direct cures for the cure of this disease. His treatment, with him including also the following: the wound with the blood-poisoned grate rubbing the dog. This reminds us of a similar remedy which Dr. Franz Hartmann, in his Lotus Blüten, 1899, page 141, introduces. Among African tribes, the eating of a stick of the raw liver of the rage-sick dog is known as an infallible remedy against the outbreak of the rage disease of the bitten people. Antidote to rabies, the specific individual antidote. This individual antidote seems to us far more correct and effective than the serum obtained by Pasteur's method. But why all these more or less disgusting cures, if in the Spirea Almeria we possess such a wonderful remedy for water aversion? Foreign blood and foreign serum are, as we shall continue to see, very dangerous injection agents. The vinegar acid seems to be at all against all kinds of blood poisonings of Gros. Thus, for example, acetic acid alumina is effectively used in the form of turnovers against the BIB Boser flies. Incidentally, the Baunscheitism is very effective against blood poisoning by flybite. Unpowerful usually medical art against such infections. The number of annual death traps by bad flies is not insignificant. Even with Rücksicht on the danger of the evil fly sting, every family should Baunscheit Taparazzachan. Found Spagyric Remedies consists in internal application of his blood, nerve N, and psora remedy alternately, and in the immediate washing out of the wound with electricity E. As soon as possible, says Dr. Zimpel, the bitten person should take a steam bath after injury has taken place. The psora middle Kidian talk as a preventive agent. The prescription of a steam bath against water shyness was also considered by the well-known homeopathic doctor Dr. Lutzy as a very preserved means. Says, against already erupted or to be feared water shyness come into consideration as internal means belladonna, hyoscyamus, and lachesis. But there is a quite indifferent remedy which has helped in every case so far, even if fear of water and anger had already broken out, but which also before the outbreak of the disease. This is a steam bath, or rather any process which produces strong sweat, for it is only through this that the poison is excreted from the blood again, and the febrile disease is again transformed into health. If one does not live in the city where one can have steam bathers, still, violent sweat can be produced by undressing the sick, placing on a wooden stool and announcing my shell with alcohol under the latter, staying out of the head and reaching the tickers fastened to the neck to the ground, and thus closing off the air. Very soon there breaks out a violent sweat, which can be found after this steam bath for some time by lying in woolly blankets until he leaves. Such improvised sweat bath may well be dangerous. Therefore it is better to place the patient on a tube chair and place underneath a large pot boiling water, which is replaced after about 10 minutes by a fresh pot of boiling water. This pot exchange is continued until the patient sweats. The arrangement of the wrapping ceilings remain the same as she just described Lutz. Besides, Lutzy is by no means the inventor of the application of sweating against the fear of water, because he himself says, darüber. Quite consistent with this recent experience is the old story of a peasant servant in Pomerania, as told to me by eyewitnesses in my childhood. As if one of the awesome dog-bited servants, their price list in the form of a free brochure of very interesting content, sends the homeopathy Zentralblatt in Göppingen, Württemberg. Men threw him into a bed, bound him with the intent of suffocating him, because in time, rabbled ofters were killed. People thrown on beds and stayed on hours sitting. Now when all was quiet and they believed, the dangerous the sick person was longest a corpse, they took away one bedcloth after another, and lo and behold, the person believed dead lay, dripping from Schweiß, but completely recovered under the soft burden, and he never again showed the slightest symptom of that suffering. Quite reprehensible, says Dr. Lutzi. I must still describe the burning out of the wound, which some doctors do to the bitten. Bite-mingled blood can remove poison again from the veins, even if the burnout could actually happen immediately after the bib. It is this a very primitive, barbaric, gross infatuation Ferdog's what held. Also on this occasion, we would like to let Dr. Husser speak, who in his Lehrbuch der Elektrohomöopathie indicates that it is a foolish habit to imprison a dog suspected of rabies, if he has bitten a human, immediately to die instead of closely observing it, Ober, Tollist or not. To carry the rage disease of the already killed dog by injection or vaccination on healthy animals, now by there to confirm rabies, is and remains a cruel act, as it is possible only in the age of vivisection. The subsequent section of the dog, but never with certainty to conclude whether he was de facto angry or not. At most it can be said, if in the dog's stomach no rags, straw, and wooden sticks were found, that he was probably not angry. N. To be continued. Occult look around. Spook. In the village of Ulm, Duchy of Salzburg, where a well-known pilgrimage church stands, lived years ago a peasant whose baptism was Caspar. He was considered an exception, i.e., he was a stranger. Whether he was single or widower, I cannot hide with certainty, but that he was strange, mistrustful, and vindictive, that is certain. Of course, his surroundings did what they could to attract and ridicule strangers through all kinds of ulcers. 21. Now when this Caspar became very sick and spied that he was going to die, he said to the farmer's wife, "Take care, for 3 years I give you no rest. I will succeed you, how you have succeeded me." On the same evening when he lay laid up in the room, the Ebitish stood in the corner of the room, as it is customary, and they just sat down in peace of mind at the usual meal. The farmer's wife came in with a chisel full of doughnuts. The daughter went after her and carried a chisel of milk. Suddenly both chisels flew to the ground, and a gray shadow that had stood unnoticed behind the tier appeared and disappeared. This shadow was also noticed next to the corpse of children. To meet the house of death, but soon he had also been seen in the stable and in the other houses of Ulm, and teased the people in Kitcha and Kammer. Nowhere was one safe from him. The people were finally accustomed to this haunting phenomenon, albeit some, especially women and children, were frightened repeatedly. But the most remarkable thing about the matter is that Caspar kept his promise. Exactly 3 years after his death were Esruhi in the village Ulm, and since then no one has seen or heard the spook. A mountain Almarin who had served us told me this story, which, in Ulm Satsam Profest, and welfare in the occult literature, many analog trap. C. Way B. in Lofer, Herzogtum Salzburg. Near the mountain Triglav, Upper Crane, Easter Kingdom, is the famous haunted Lambach, a well-preserved, romantically located building, but which has been uninhabited for a long time. Besides being the present owner of this haunted castle, despite being only a simple countryman, to rent or sell. Ancient things should happen there. A big wheel which stands in the front hall, and which one from outside through the window sees, an apparatus whose former destiny no one knows anything, shall begin to turn at midnight, bypassing a night without a head in it. The spook is said to be so feasible that as a result it is generally assured of the last 2 visitors who were nighting, one of whom was found dead the next morning, and the other had become insane. Since then, unsuccessfully curious have sought permission from the owner for the night. The building is permanently locked, and its owner does not, of course, live in it himself. But this haunted silo is supposed to be just an object, glowing desire of American speculators who like to furnish it as a haunted hotel. Being but owners resist the most attractive purchase offers. Reported by M. Cossack in Neue Wiener Journal, dated July 24, 1912. What is the purpose of making the haunted Bein haunted hotel? Many of our readers will ask. Very simply, this would be a sparkling business for the Americans. a real haunted hotel profits greatly for American guest experiences. The same pay fabulous prices, partly out of curiosity, partly according to a superstitious tradition, according to which sleeping in a haunted room should be glicking under certain circumstances, in a haunted house to smear night. Perhaps one of our revered readers could tell us the haunted Lamback. Perhaps the owner came to accommodate at least photographic apparatuses in the haunted room, which could be drawn from outside by electric means at the time of the haunted, in order to obtain perfect transcendental photographs. Also, one could try to accommodate a few sharp dogs, a few nighttime haunting lodges, and observe from the outside how the animals behave at the time of the haunting apparitions. For practical, courageous experimental occultists, there would also be on Schlapp's Lamback opportunity to manifold experiments and studies. Über die Oberkrane is a Perliter Österreichische Alpen yonder. Soda Bein Reise dahinüber, all circumstances pandist. Zentralblatt für Ockultismus v. Jarg. The construction of the Millstraw. A universe should have no borders. But what can the arrimed human spirit do with an infinity of space, which increases his imagination hopelessly? He must search for borders in order first to arrive at a composure. And so he also draws the universe. The presumed boundary or frame of the universe, to which the sun and all other suns belong, is the Milky Way, and then the flight of thought remains only left to enter into the infinite spaces of the universe. Beyond still other, perhaps similar universa to think. UBT, the composition of the Millstraw, Professor Charlier has published in the Communications of the Observatory at the Swedish Universitat Lund, a work that shows so quite the immense difficulties of research in those distant regions. Indeed, there are so far only very few certain observational stats on which the science there is focused. Professor Charlier firstly tries to establish the number of stars in different parts of the Milchstraße. Secondly, the distribution of their hay. Has divided the whole sky into 48 equal squares for this purpose, while, in the sky furthest from the Milchstraße, between 600,000 and 2 million stars each account for one of these quadrilaterals. Their number within the Milchstraße is between 30 and 250 million to estimate. To make the distance easier to represent, Professor Charlier introduced a new mob, the seriometer, which is 1,000,000 times greater than the average distance of the Earth from the Sun. The boundary of our universe will then be between 600 and 1,400 seriometers, measured in the plane of the Milchstraße. Food with artificially produced foods, the dream of all chemists before Emil Fischer in Berlin, have found the individual building blocks of nuclear materials from which food can be prepared in the laboratory. Emil Fischer has been prepared from formaldehyde, and starting from glycerose grape sugar. At present, like Prof. Abderhalden in the Umschauschrei, it is only a question of money to represent all these building blocks synthetically, and then to fully nourish an animal. The problem of the artificial representation of food is thus completely solved. We can fully nourish animals with products made in the chemical laboratory. Since the synthetic production of foodstuffs will ever have practical significance, is not to be assumed. We will not be able to compete with the pilot, which builds the foodstuffs much cheaper and more expediently than chemists in the laboratory. These products are not only very expensive, but also do not taste good. However, scientifically it is of great importance that one can eliminate the cell metabolism here more and more. You have already completely cut off egg proteins, even BLT23. And these products are readily digested and without doubt utilized by the organism. Furthermore, candor-like products can be used with advantage when it comes to keeping the intestinal canal completely at rest for some time, for example, after surgical interventions. It is to be hoped that the products also benefit the suckling food. Furthermore, in serum therapy in individual cases, individual pathways will be deprived of their species, and thus the risk of hypersensitivity can be encountered. Requests for answers of general letterbox. Interested, get done here. RMNB. Even pagan philosophers had the Occult effect of prayer views, which are strikingly similar to those of the Christian mystics. Jamblichus writes Darabur in his work Eber the Mysteries of the Egyptians, Sect VC 26, as follows. Since prayers make up a large part of the sacred usage, it is also they which create for religion an all-common benefit, and an indissoluble community of the gods with the priests. For since this thing in itself is already wretched and praiseworthy, it also leads to a perfect knowledge of divine things. Therefore prayer gives us the knowledge of divine things, the community and the indissoluble bond with the gods, and thirdly, which is the most important thing, that unspeakable intimacy which puts all its strength only in God and puts our soul in such a glacial rest. This repeated prayer approaches the mind and prepares our souls for sacred things, opens the divine to man, and gradually accustoms him to the splendor of the divine light. It makes us our suffering and enduring the human weaknesses, draws our customs towards Obi-Wan, and unites them with the divine being, causes a communal conviction, an indissoluble friendship, warms the holy love in our soul, and desenses all that is divine. It purifies all the antagonisms of the soul. It produces hope and faithful faith in the light. Words, it helps those to converse intimately with the gods, who attain themselves therein. From this therefore arises the sorrowful, violent, and fulfilling power of the Gebet. How it is, and how it is the bond with the support of the gods. How prayer and sacrifices alternately empower one another, communicate the sacred power of religion, and make it perfect. It is therefore not befitting to despise prayer altogether, or only to admit something of it and reject something else. No, one must do it altogether, and above all, those who sincerely wish to unite with God do not do it. Jamblichus is a well-known magician, became so famous because of his extraordinary cures and his teachings that Euapius called him the Admiration Devil and Proclus the Godly. Notifications of changes, which sometimes showed jewelry embroidery by illness of the wearer in a striking way, did not remain unnoticed. We are now in the pleasing and grateful position to write the following letters. Schlersee, Upper Bavaria, Villa Kaulbach, 2.712. Dear Sir, since you are your subscribers to the Zentralblatt for Occultism Surantrag, Observations of Change of Color of Stones and Corals, I would like to share some occurrence reports from my own experience. Even when I was still a small child, my followers always saw on the coral chain, which I always wore, whether I was completely well. Often, before I felt a discomfort myself, the coral blah blah lost its luster. The so-called and popular school fever was completely excluded under this control. I had the same experience with my children, only I found that the corals got a higher red and a stronger shine if the children were very cheerful and licky. Appearances occur. My granddaughter always wears a silver bracelet. This winter, when they jaundice, it became all black. Cleaning helped nothing, but after the improvement occurred, lost of itself the dark coloration. A turquoise I wear on my finger changes color and gets grinned when I am not well. But the most sensitive is my monthly stone, chrysoprase, which I always wear on a chain under the clothes, i.e. directly closed. It's pretty big, kind of like half a nub, and I notice that it shows not only my physical condition, but especially my mental condition. Only if both are in perfect harmony, the stone is pure and shining. Otherwise, gray clouds will pull him away. What it means if he is completely without the latter, but his color from Hellgrün at respectfully close to us, I do not know. Professor Sophie Kaulbach. Furthermore, Mr. Karl Hermann Heise, Zurich, informed us with a letter from 2.7.12 the following. My little 22-year-old bride's engagement ring also often loses its color fire. But as soon as I am there, the ring and stone are again full of glory and purity. Take this for a pleasant note. From these examples plotted from the present time, it is evident that the ancient belief of the corporeal and spiritual interaction between limbs and their carriers is based on truth. Our esteemed readers are therefore courteously requested once again to send us for publicity the observations such as those described above. The more modern factual material we can present, the more attentively and with great interest the treatises which now follow Eber the occult craters of the stones and metals of each, the scriptures. Man Be Read. The Magic of Numbers. Unfortunately, such a book as You Win does not yet exist in German. However, we can best describe the work of Safariel, the Kabaya of Numbers, a handbook to be obtained by the publisher. I recommend interpretation in English. Central Journal. The book contains the following chapters on 162 pages. 1. The Power of Numbers. 2. Geometrical Relation of Thought. 3. Numerology. 4. Various Methods of Kabbalism. 5. Number, Form, Color, Sound, Names, Numbers and Incidents. 6. Chance Events. 7. Reduction to Law. 8. Numbers and Automatism. 9. Thought Reading by Numbers. 10. The Significance of Numbers. XLL. Of Things Lost. The Kabbalism of Cycles. X14. Success and Failure. X15. The Law of Values. X16. God Geometrizes. The mentioned richly illustrated work deals with the magic of numbers, both from the point of view of Kabbalah and also from the point of view of astrology. Nay, it even resorts to the mystical number theory of Pythagoras, i.e., examples from history, how the Kabbalist is already able to indicate their character traits from the name of a person, and how these again coincide with the domestic astrological influences. Kabbalah with the astrology and the number theory of the ancient mystics is thus pointed out. In Kirza Reform, 61 pages, but equally commendable, treated H. Ahmad obtains the same field of knowledge in his Bickline, The Hidden Mysteries of Numbers, by the publisher of the Zentralblatt. Practical as the English are, both authors have even tried to apply the Kabbalah of numbers to determine the chances of winning in the horse races so popular in England. ZZ, regarding R. Bloom's dispute questions, etc. In this respect, the following letters were received by the guide, which we are happy to publish. But with this, therefore, believe these actual discussions. Who among our treasured readers desire to continue debating with Mr. Bloom Darüber, who may address himself directly to the gentleman just mentioned, whose address is Stuttgart, Kornberger Street, 9. Munich, July 23, 1912. Dear President, referring to the article Disputes by R. Bloom in the Zentralblatt for Occultism, Year 5, Number 2, I would like to draw your attention to an important work by Blavatsky, from which some of the disputations of Bloom are derived. Max Altman, where the author, page 135, himself comes to this question. Question. But was not the author of Isis Unveiled himself accused of having written against rebirth? Answer. Yes, but only by those who had understood what had been said. At the time that work was written, neither the English nor the American spiritualists believed in reincarnation, and what was said there in reincarnation was directed against the French spiritualists, whose theory is as unphilosophical and absurd as the Eastern doctrine is logical and effervescent in its truth. Rebirth believe in an entirely willing and immediate rebirth. They have neither devachan, karma, nor any philosophy which would justify or prove the necessity of rebirth. 26. But how could the author of Isis, against the karmic rebirth in periods of 1,000 to 1,500 years, disputes, since it is of all grounds the belief of both the Buddhist and the Hindu? Thomas Kielechner. Very respectful, Warschau, 10 July 1912. Dear Mr. Waitzer, in the July 1912 issue of the Zentralblatt for Occultismus, which I have just received, I find a letter from Mr. R. Bloom in response to the article H. P. Blavatsky, a Medium, appeared in May 1912, and I cannot help but also speak a word. Just as Mr. Bloom represents the thing, H. P. Blavatsky was really a medium, but then we are all, every person without exception, media. For each one is subject to the psychic influence of his environment, his friends, and the astral beings, whose nature is analogous to his own. If the concept is thus extended, one can completely dispense with the word medium and place man therefore. Until now, however, the word medium was used to denote those people who are the mediators between the astral world and the material world, but whoever draws self-conscious influences corresponding to his own nature is not a mediator, but a one-self-active being. If, as Mr. Bloom quotes, the seer of Prevorst and Mrs. d'Esperance remained conscious among the phenomena that provoked sick. They were not self-acting and self-conscious. H.P. Blavatsky gave herself as a mediator only to her masters, and otherwise completely dominated the astral world and its beings. And therein lies the great difference between media and occultists. A difference that we occultists all strive to confirm our being more and more, and not to give it up. As the media shits, they want to be successful in their profession. Very respectful, A. von Ulrich, Malmau, July 8, 1912. To the venerated guide of the Zentralblatt for Occultismus. If a foreigner, Swedish, should also be allowed to use the Zentralblatt to say a few words, I would be very grateful to the honored editorial staff for wanting to follow. 27. It is a counterclaim that I would like to make to the so determined. There is only one excuse for Mr. Bloom, namely, that he has not yet reached the point of view from which it is possible for him to understand H.P.B's writings. Mrs. B. War mytien, M.A. Waren, Mind Bebekstund, schon on her most, in her youth, she had the opportunity to develop herself towards alien sides, for which the great journeys which she made contributed not a little. It was for her to see and study writings which are quite inaccessible to others. With coarse zeal and never-fainting energy she worked, and when at last the morning star pointed the way for her, she was prepared and had enough wisdom to follow it. What she found was her master, and suddenly all that was clear to her in the ancient scriptures, which is written only for the enlightened. There she learned what all those who reached the goal experienced, namely an unspeakable joy, an indescribable slickness, and at the same time the desire to give all other people of this slick. She fed together and clarified, added her own experiences, and thus created a work that will remain unappreciated for a long time. And this should not be their own. Then do you have any credit for it? But have it been given by a standing intelligence? Never. In myself I have experienced what I know, that I know through myself. I have climbed the summit where the light shines to me. I have created my own self, and in no self it is possible for me to understand all that for so many others is still an unsolved mystery. It is a sad thing that the teaching of the masters of so many. I am not a member of any Theosophical society, nor have I ever had the opportunity to meet with Theosophists. Therefore, a program for the Congress of the J.V. zu Magdeburg was sent to me by the guideline of the Zentralblatt. I felt like attending a congress. The leaders of the congress, who took it upon themselves to meet me, the stranger, I was informed that no one could be a Theosophist who did not think exactly like him and was a member of his society. At my remark that the various other societies also believed that they were true Theosophists, answer that they had nothing at all in common with Theosophy. Remark, but you should try to spread your conception more, that other people were also enlightened. Then I got an answer that I had never expected from an educated person, much less from a Theosophist. Namely, what the hell do stupid people care about me? I only glimmer about myself and my companionship. And Sopenleich I also felt overwhelmed, so I felt terribly sorry for the man. I might not have quite understood why I noticed that Blavatsky had devoted her whole life to enlightening other people. I didn't need to doubt anymore. A shrug and, well, B also wrote a lot of stupid stuff, were the answer. 28. The man with whom he had corresponded, and who mainly for his sake, he apologized to see the young man. Shortly afterwards, he closed his doors to us with the remark, "So, that would be worried." The young man wanted his get to know the teacher personally. The latter was mainly addressed to me. I do not need to say that this had not impressed me at all. There is no danger of the poor Schiller, and how many evils such a teacher or the master is not able to do so. Is the skier only medium-sized and with little? If he has left willpower, then he can very easily be influenced by such a teacher, or become a medium with other words. Even though it may not be sufficiently damaged, it will still be very depressed. A highly developed man, whose character is fixed, will never be influenced by another intelligence. After Mr. Blum's assertion, Mrs. B., who is endowed with such an abnormal mind and an indomitable willpower, should have been a medium. Blum is also clearly at his concluding remark. It is neither an art nor a disgrace, but only something dangerous to be a medium. Yes, both, dangerous and degrading. And first of all, mediumship is only one for people of our present, the fifth root race still in abnormal condition, but which will be normal in individuals of the next, the sixth root race according to HPB's own view. Now Mr. Blum surely knows that the world is in a constant development. Why, the men of the sixth race will have ended with a much more developed intelligence and willpower than our present. They are human beings, and therefore they would hardly give themselves to media, i.e., in the sense of the word, as Mr. Blum asserts. Mrs. B has meant something completely different, and rightly, because a man who has reached the highest level, thus has become one with his God, who used his human being, i.e. his own personality, as a medium. In the sense of the word, one can say Dob Frau, as long as ABCR as Mr. Blum with medium describes an individual who is dominated by another intelligence, which is also nowadays generally understood by the word. So long one must not say that woman, Ms. Marie Dingertz, B.A. medium was. Regimengaten 34, Malmö, Sweden. All of the bikes mentioned here are by Die Sortimentsabteilung der Verlagsbuchhandlung. Max from the Bike Table, Altmann in Leipzig. 29 Traum, a Theosophical Study by C.W. Leadbeater. Second Increased Edition. Authorized translation by Ginter Wagner. Leipzig, Verlag Max Altmann. Price Bras, MK1. Anyone who deals with the problem of dream research should Broshire Leadbeaters unconditionally read. The author gives in it, first of all, a dar, position of the mechanism by which the ego receives incitements of the outside world, then the role of this mechanism in the emergence of the various types of traumas. Dematerialistic science would die in very recent times also, but since it holds the physical body of man for himself, and of the existence of the ather astral and mental body knows nothing, but Leadbeater takes into account these different bodies and their functions very detailed. So one can well imagine who is better able to solve the problem of the dream, to get to the bottom. Of course, Leadbeater also deals with dreams. Sometimes these dreams are warning dreams. Man can thus, although not always, by will and reason effort, avoid a threatening danger, a disaster, which is shown to him in the dream. Own therefore in accordance with his insight and development, yet a free will. Leadbeater also tried to evoke kinstically dreams, both through mechanical, in addition, in the addendum of the brochure, a guide is given as to how, by forming a house from astral mass, by volitional concentration of thoughts, one can to fall asleep. Original System of Palm Reading, a practical manual for quick and easy recognition of character and destiny from the forms and lines of the hand, with 63 illustrations, edited by H. Ottinger, homeopath, Arts in St. Gallen, Leipzig 1912, Verlag by Max Altmann, Price Bras, MK 150. An in-depth discussion of this handy little bike is worthwhile. The same as a special imprint of the book published in the V. Original System of the Hand-Reading Art of H. Ottinger. However, who is not in possession of the just-mentioned vintage of the Zentralblatt für Occultismus and a short introduction to the not-easy art of chiromancy winched, the present brochure is highly recommended. C.E. The Temple of Immortality. An anthology of the most sublime thoughts and speeches and well-known researches, thinkers and poets Fortdauer and Reunion, with many notes. Edition by J.T.H. J. Werkmeister, Leipzig 1912, Verlag von Oswald Mutze, Price Bras, 2 Mark. And we have a lot of them, and a lot of them. Hearts can wink. Instead of criticism, we leave the author himself to the purpose of his work, to speak, and our readers will find that the author has honestly fulfilled his program, which was divided in the preface. 30 deaths of those who have become so dear and dear to us here below. There can be no better and more gentle consolation than the conviction of immortality and reunion beyond the grave. This anthology is to resemble a temple, where God enthusiastic and highly esteemed explorers, Thinkers and poets of different peoples gather together in a holy, most serious community, and let us hear the great question of the immortality of the soul's voices. The following leafers offer a fill of the most sublime thoughts and spouts, which are, from a fundamental point of view, already valuable and meaningful, because they are not products of the moment, of whim, of mood, of recklessness, of mockery, or of world pain, but of hours of devotion and consecration, which immersion into the sacred depths of one's spiritual life, as well as the elevation of the energetic psyche, because they are mostly born of seriousness and pain. Truly pious men, harmonious the various expressions sound together into the full chords. We live, whether we die, alike. May all our readers enjoy the rich content of this anthology, and be satisfied, and GWS for their friend's suggestion, comfort, and light. False printer correction. In the July issue, the signatures were mistakenly reversed for figures number 2 and 3. The signature is heard under figure 2, Crep, Gavasahen, enlargement, and under figure 3 the signature, Phantom Sehire, medium FRL Tamke. Accordingly, the illustrations on page 12 line must read 5 Yanoben instead of 3U42U4. Page 15 line 9 of above instead of 1U2 1U3. Page 17 line 6 of above 2-3. Central Journal of Occultism, monthly, to explore the entire secret sciences. Director D. Georgievitz Weitzer. Subscriptions price for Germany and Österreich-Hungary annually Mark 8, for foreign countries Mark 10. Manuscripts and letters are to be sent to the if no express cancellation is made at the end of a year. The subscription applies. Director Mr. D. Georgievitz Weitzer in Graz, Maigasse 27. Tacitly as for the most vintage of advertisements without enclosed return Mark Ben Ashlingert. Possibility answered in the mailbox. The font line is Vier Divan under Siegsign, Inseret Prize, Mark 0.44 D. Einmal gespart. Line Netten article response. The individual authors, all money consignments to the publishing bookshop have to represent the views laid down in their works. By Max Aitman in Leipzig. 4th issue, October 1912, Year 6. Reprints of all essays are prohibited. A German Mystic, by G. W. Surya. 31. Franz Hartmann, the most important German mystic of the present, has gone. Grazer Tagblatt, 23/8/1912. Within 4 months, in the year 1912, Drygro truth fighters were recalled from this earth. W. T. Stead, the apostle of peace and courageous confessor of spiritism. General W. Booth, who founder of the Salvation Army so blessed, and Dr. Franz Hartmann, the editor of the Lotus Blüten and most important German mystics of our time. Aberlich, these are 3 completely different individualities, each name, so to speak, a program in itself, and yet these 3 rare men are as close to each other inwardly as the colors of the solar spectrum, as the harmonic tones of a triad, as the fingers of one and the same hand. The large strategist who guides our evolution must march these 3 leaders separately, but later generations will realize that 3-star was destined to beat the materialism of our co-united forces. Highly conspicuous, and for occult-sensing natures more than mere coincidence, the career of these 3 marked champions of a true humanity and higher worldview in such a narrow innit. The modern scientist will once again confirm the law of serial visions. The astrologer on certain clues to the constellations of the stars, Jupiter, Saturn. The mystic, however, will say, what is the law of serials? What is the influence of the stars? And, unlike the expression of that cosmic meaning. Zentralblatt for Occultismus VI, Dr. Franz Hartmann. This cosmic wile, Welcher according to Jakob Boehme, is the will of eternal wisdom, seeks to realize an idea of love, truth, and beauty in humanity, and where he has a fit human heart, a humble ancient brand finds, there he flows in, there works, and creates God else, as an Angelus Silesius expresses himself. Highest are all humans who are called to intervene so visibly in Sarah evolution, such as a Stead, Booth, Dr. Franz Hartmann and many others who work in the quiet of Rabies, whose names become known. And those who have been made to work in secret are more enviable fighters for the kingdom of God. Surely a human feather will recount their good works, so they are also lavor bewahart, so that their imperfections and faults are revealed to the light of day. It is true that Christ has already alerted us to the fact that we empathize. Our Father in heaven, to call perfect urinen, namely Olin. But few people have thought about what this should be, and still less in judgment of their fellow men to consider this. Was Peter not an apostle, because in a weak hour he master denied that Augustine was not a church father, because it was difficult to wrestle with his low nature? Paracelsus was not a mystic, because he drank meat a covenant wine. Rousseau was not a pioneering egotist, did not feast a morally impeccable life. Goethe was not a Okkultist, because he lived through more than one love adventure. Libetzkane was a philosopher, because he was racking up money. Richard Wagner was not a God-gifted tone poet, because he had in certain sections of his just dripping debt. Tolstoy was not an honest wrestling followers of Christ, because he lived great as an officer and ended up with his family throw. This list could be carried on endlessly. 32. It shows, of course, that even the grossest human beings are not free from human weaknesses. But have they wrestled in vain, what their lives are worthless, or even harmful to humanity? This is the main question that we must also ask ourselves when considering the life and work of Dr. Franz Hartmann. This question has been answered by none other than Lord Bulwer in his incomparable Zenoni Succession. If it were necessary that the doing was in complete harmony with the teaching, said Zenoni with a bitter smile, the doing or few the right to take us and warn us. The action of the individual describes only a small circle besides him. The lasting good or evil which he works for others lies more in the sentiments which he can spread. His deeds are limited and instantaneous. His dispositions can permeate the world, and generational enthusiasts to the day of judgment. All our virtues, all our laws, are made of bicers and maxims, which are dispositions and thoughts, not deeds. Intact acting Julian had the virtues of a Christian, and Constantine the vice of a saint. The minds of Juliet attracted thousands to paganism. Zurich, who served Constantine, who by heaven's will bow the nations under Christianity. In Life and Change, the smallest fisherman there by the sea, who can attend the miracles of San Gennaro, believes to be a better Maisch than even Luther. Luther's verrangt der Geist des modernen Europadi edelste, the revolution he ever experienced. Our opinions are the angelic part of us, our working part of the earth. But now we have to add that Dr. Franz Hartmann, in his writings, far out Eber, Lord Bulwer. Esli Bennickhaus, hundreds of places, from which it is clear how high Dr. Franz Hartmann assesses the influence of our deeds, our example, on fellow and posterity. Dobb himself has not possessed the power to shape his last earthly life according to his ideal, gave openly in word and writing. And be just, where does a man live among us who can claim to have already attained perfection in every respect? We therefore leave it to the Norglers to find in Dr. Franz Hartmann all sorts of bad things, i.e. incomplete things, and would rather deal with it briefly to point out what a Dr. Franz Hartmann for the spiritual development of all mankind, and especially of the German the people, did. In his recollections of thinking, he himself distinguishes himself as a mystic, and has thus correctly estimated himself. Early he noticed mystical inclinations in himself. In the Memories of Thinking just mentioned, he writes himself as follows. In Kempten experienced Hartmann's seine Jugend Unterhalten under Ordican Latin School, his school lessons. But better than 33, everything Latin was for him, the free nature. He had the most dense forest dusk, run the Reichelsberg, built a nest on a high fir, and brought there many hours in the Gesellschaft der Waldgeister, and with the reading of mystical writings. Born there on November 22, 1838, at 2 a.m., Dr. F. Hartmann, an old Russian book, Eber Astrology, claims that persons born on November 22nd will not have a permanent residence throughout their lives. With Dr. F.H., this has come true. He has never been in one place for more than 5 years. Mystic nature and his propensity to the mysterious was multiplied especially by two bikers who come into his hands early on, namely Heinrich Schacke's Enverredung and Elizabeth Crow's Night Side of Nature. Even as a child, he seems to have doubled, to have perceived and felt the nature of man, for he could hardly stammer, as already spoke of a good and a bad Franz. The latter has the good also in later. For many years it has been a great struggle, just as for every man, the whole of his life has been a struggle between the high and the he. Who has no energy in himself, he likes in the Spijort, where the creative power works. There soon the urge for high lifts up the man, soon the passion draws him down again. There the soul swings a pendulum. Dr. Franz Hartmann was also to get to know this, reciprocating in spiritual things in himself. When he entered the university in München in 1860, the period of the most blatant materialism in scientific circles had just begun, and it was not long before a friend, who was an enthusiastic follower of Ludwig Bichner, had torn the church faith from his heart, without being able to put something better in its place. The experiences he had in New Orleans, in America, the materialistic world-view in their sinking into nothingness. Already the first spiritualist session tended to it. How did all the bullshit written by the opponents of spiritualism, the betrayals of the media, all the nonsense of modern philosophers, those of the nonsense of the multitude, has erected altars, be thrown the heap by an old uneducated woman. Universities' professors, things of which they had seen nothing, and of which they knew nothing, worth in the eyes of those who saw and knew, saw beings. And in subsequent 10 years experimented Dr. Franz Hartmann now eagerly with the most famous media, such as Self-Employed, Chess Forster, Henry Slade, Mr. Miller, in Denver, etc. He says that it is hardly possible that there should have been anyone in Europe or America who has seen more of spiritualistic phenomena. Nevertheless, these phenomena, like Dr. Franz Hartmann, not our researchers. In addition to high and sublime manifestations, there was also much laughter and some lurks in these spiritistic sessions from the side of the ghosts to show up. Dr. Franz Hartmann again, the mystical nature. His desire was to know what the world actually is. To such questions the spirits could give him non-satisfactory answers. In this time, he came into the hands of H.P. Blavatsky's Isis Unveiled. Soon afterwards, the author of Isis Unveiled personally became known, by which he was now completely gained for Theosophy. Some years at the headquarters of the Theosophical Society in India, then traveled to Europe and started publishing the Lotus Bleats there. Thus begins the third and most important part of his life and creativity. Dr. Franz Hartmann now deepened the study of the Christian mystics, the Rosicrucians, and alchemists, and soon saw that they were intrinsically in tune with the principles of the Indian mysticists. Subsequent treatises from his pen, The Secret Doctrine of the Christian Religion, in which he shows that the mysticism of a Master Eckhart is identical with the Eastern mysticism of the Vedic, Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, even though at the time of the Master Eckhart, none of these Oriental. And strange as it may sound, Dr. Franz Hartmann learned, only through the study of the Oriental literature, really to grasp the deep treasure of the German mysticism from Eckhart to Ruckert, and has brought us Germans, so to speak, only once again to the German mysticism attention, and to the same our intellectual understanding. Paracelsus, no second German writer than Dr. Franz Hartmann, who was himself a physician, occultist, theosophist, and mystic, was called upon to infer the teaching of Paracelsus both from the medical and from the mystical and occult standpoint of in popular form. Just as immortal was Dr. Franz Hartmann, active in the spread of the Theosophical Society in Germany. His Lotus Bleats powerfully demanded the Theosophical movement, and he himself literally gave theosophical, occult, and mystical lectures, these permanently visited goods. Most of his scriptures are like magic and magic. The life and teachings of Paracelsus have appeared in all cultural languages. Some of his best works, such as The Secret Figures of the Rosicrucians of the 16th and 17th century, are still to be put into German. Impersonal intercourse, as in life in general, he showed himself as the archetype of the modest, staid, selfless German character. Even his long sojourn abroad could not do anything else. The effects of a personality such as that of Dr. Franz Hartmann let themselves become at once difficult to complete. The next 50 to 100 years will only show what a spiritual power center was. It is hard to doubt that Dr. Franz Hartmann, after departing from his physical body, as well as Stead and General Booth, first of all, the highest. Perhaps Providence has recalled these three men just now, because their activity is of the greatest necessity of time. And then he stays on the ground. Small Course of Physiognomy, from the French by Leah Fearhow. Continued, Sun type. The Sun type is opposite to the Earth type. The former is the deepest in the physiognomic octave, the second the highest physical. The hair is golden blonde, fine, the forehead free and high, elegantly curved, proportioned and free of, the brows are slightly curved and dim, the eyes saffron-colored with gold points, and at the same time look at each other gently and strictly. They rule and fascinate to the same degree. The Sun man possesses an eagle nose that is neither bent up nor hanging down, with an even point, long nostrils. The mouth is fine, closed, under-curved nose, a little curved, the lips narrow, the chin round and protruding. This is what the face looks like. The corporist is slim and well-proportioned. On the whole, the figure appears fine and elegant. The impression of the whole figure is at the same time gentle and serious, noble and captivating. Psyche. The sons of sunshine are born to command, radiate, and harmony to spread. They possess treasures of the heart and the spirit, as they are necessary for fulfilling their destiny. A perfect intelligence sets them in a position to cultivate with success all branches of human knowledge, military art, literature, science, government, and especially the beautiful arts and occult sciences in which they occupy the first place. Their clear, realistic sense does not prevent them from the ability of imagination and a higher intuition, which they endow with inventiveness and divination. Memory is an excellent one. In everything her look is self-sufficient, widely considering in the conduct of their affairs and in the treatment of men, firm and majestic in their plans, wise in their advice, they exercise an irresistible influence on their surroundings. Your superiority is acknowledged without contradiction. Their beautiful speech is rich in images and clear of terms, and possesses a graceful, magnificent swing. They possess a sovereign will, with all nuances, determination, endurance, strength, iron energy. Their commands are short and clear, containing no iberflous word, calm and secure, since their observance is self-understanding and without contradiction. Individuals in attenuated mabe, without the character of the Toulouse balance of synthesis, which is the main property of Sun type. Their feelings are full of nobility and greatness. Intercourse they show themselves benevolently, with preference protect their friends, and spread good around themselves. But their closed, serious nature, their self-consciousness, the tendency to isolate oneself and consult only with themselves, specialism, means that they are not very courted and have little devoted friends. You respect and admire them, but you don't cling to them. This deficiency of an emblematic Sun type is so prominent that in it a Mabe Sun, Apollo, develops loose pride, pride to madness, and extreme egoism, as a result of which he meboked the family duties. In addition, there is an unadulterated ambition that drives him to tyranny and despotism, but which for the most part does not reach his goal, because enemies of power face his way and finally his. On the other hand, often the fate Souder Sun children ruining. The supremacy of their thoughts and their fierceness of soul is always the means to endure the most difficult fates and even martyrdom, without the affection of a weak person. In the care of love they are unmildable, be it that they themselves have too high a conception of it, the realization of which they do not find, or because they seldom find so exquisite a nature, which pass to them. The drawing of the tight bears an impact of Mercury and Saturn. Physical hardships bring them the greatest endurance, as one does not trust their languish au barren. They love cleanliness, they just live at home, they love to surround themselves with luxury. It gives them pleasure to walk in palaces, magnificent buildings, parks, hear bell sounds, and enjoy serious music rich in harmonious beauty. Particularly characteristic is Fursithi preference for a lot of light, the wearing of jewelry, and their ability to look at the sun. The Sun Woman has a royal attitude without imitating the traditional poses. She has in her stiffness and in her pride the pride of certain so-called higher circles, which has become second nature. Their manners are simple but impressing by their radiance, by her radiant appearance, and by her art in dealing with people. She is attracted by enlightened spirits and high-ranking people, especially literates and art learners. She is a virtuous and devoted wife, but is often misunderstood. Unfortunately, man does not often encounter the sun type among the higher circles of our time. It is found on several occasions only in lower and less pragmatic individualities, with admixtures of secondary types. Therefore, the earth influence is disturbed, and the people who cannot find the highest light stay in the dark, groping for enlightenment in science, show their inner nature in trivial, sensual literature, and finally declare higher feelings void, impossible for them, leaving traces in the memory of the people, while he manifested himself through his high qualities on the beneater world. Although the characters that we can cite here as representatives were not free from interference, they were always mentioned as such. Napoleon, Louis XIV, Charles the Great as king, Lamartine and Leonardo da Vinci among the artist natures. We also want to call Christ here, not because we know his outer appearance, but because it is precisely the artists who strive to meet him with the characteristic members of the solar nature equipment. We start with the Mars and Moon types next. The Mars type is physical, flaming red hair, sparing at the apex. The head protrudes, the forehead high, skewed forward. The temples are wide with many veins, the brows bulged, thick and brittle. The eye red, wide open, sparkling, fascinating, solid, and strongly radiant gaze. Angular cheekbones, tight waltz muscles which appear to be flattened. Hook-shaped curved nose, like an eagle beak, with wide openings. Sometimes the nose is short and wide. The mouth is curved, with world-contemptuous pulled-down mouth angles and angular lips. The chin protruding, squat, massive. The trunk stems, on the whole a lean, sluggish, muscular form. It makes the impression of strength and violence. The main character of the martyr is activity, its power of defense of the land service or the conquest of unknown land, of research or invention, of destruction or rebellion, depending on the individual's tendency toward good or evil. Sentiments are big, violent, little weighed, and cause them to make judgments in a laughable and appropriate way, to achieve rapid movements or changes in space. Probably interested in dramas and adventures, shows, and the theater, especially for military weapons, but he does not give preference to subjective sentiment, to the fruit of the one deramister educational power, but to the more brutal external influences. I also take pleasure in player and sportsman, and find much pleasure in soldier parades, in hunting and life in the field. His warlike sense, when he engages him in the field of ideas and forms, gives him a critical spirit. He is not capable of his combat desire to conceal, and therefore the impatience and the over-foaming energy drives him, often to hurtful frankness, bringing hostility. On the other hand, it is his gentle side, that he is straight, open, and absent from every lie. The Martian nature innerst line military professions bore, the capture and carving out of the terrain information, a keenly sighted glance, rapid decision, spirit of order and obedience, courage and dexterity, all these qualities which led him to war suitable, are united in him. If these humans possess a natural disposition towards art, then they always look for the effect and screaming contrasts in it. They are dramatists among the literary. As painters, they use sharply halbe Farben. As a speaker, they speak an energetic and stirring language. Their will is hard, indomitable, despotic. In all their actions they lead violence and force that does not miss its impression. In their personal lives, the same exuberance and passion are manifested. In everything, they push the goal. In religion, they are either accredited or fanatics, and they do not mediate. They are high-hearted, knightly natures, liberal up to the waist, and love to stand up for the weak against the strong, endangering one's own interests or life. For the rest, they are perpetually noble-minded, and possess in themselves a fund of unselfishness and sacrifice, which their character gives the character of gropion noblesse. But they like to rank themselves iberina big, and this, together with their relentless openness, their harsh speech, and imperious nature, makes them miphallic easily. This can assume a frightening vehemence in the bad Martian type. It foams, white bites, beats around, and destroys everything that comes straight to it. Small mistakes are made by him with great severity, and adultery is never forgiven. Their stately nature, their proud attitude, their courage and chivalry, character poured favor on women who are already attracted by their physical strength alone. The Martians know how to make themselves at all popular with women, though not always with the most gentle means. They love strong drinks, semi-raw flesh, and are very much inclined to the specials. They have the desires of love, by the affirmation of their physical powers. Thus their favorite occupations are those as naturalists and members of expeditions. And here their skirt also coincides entirely with their ability, for they possess the necessary courage, which does not frighten at anything, dexterity and vitality, as they are of no other type. The bad Martian type is not able to rein in his instincts, and in order to satisfy them, he also causes quarrels and squabbles and mutinies. Finally, he also confronts society in open struggle by succumbing to robberies or joining with murderers. Iron or firearms are destroyed. For the woman, this type is by no means ginstig. He gives her a manly being, a rude nature, and inharmonious soul life. The Mars type is often found among military personnel, guards, overseers, and all those who have to do with iron, such as forges, weapons manufacturers, metalworkers, surgeons, butcher. The great seafarers who have explored our globe through long journeys belong to the highest level of this type, whereas assassins, robbers, matchmakers, etc. belong to its lowest level. As examples of Mars types, we mention some very well-known people, but already have a weakening secondary influence: Rochefort, Cazignac, Stanley, and from the old days, Peter den Groben, Charles XII, Christopher Columbus, Du Guesclin. The function of the Mars-type existence in the defense of a country and in the protection of its interests, both internally and externally. He has to maintain the public order, to shepherd the nation, and to guard its property. Ehrenhoffen, just as his nature is, he fills in the best possible way all professions which require courage, vigor, and trust. However, the limits of his intelligence do not allow him to rise to a certain level. He needs guidance. He is born to spheres, but still to obey. Moon type. The opposite of the Mars type is the Moon type. The purely physical activity of the former is opposed by the purely psychic activity of the latter. Physical. Rich fine hair of dull blonde color, ash blonde. Bred protruding sleep, a round forehead, wide and high. Brows fine, abundant, without bulge. The eyes are blue, round, neither protruding nor low-lying, dreamy, veiled, melancholy, rigid and lost-looking. The eyelashes wide. Short vision is common. The nose is short, bulging in the middle. The cheeks full, the mouth small, semi-open, with round, strong, bladder lips, which are sometimes styled up or sulking. Blurred chin. Neck and body tending to fat forms. On the whole, the shape is soft, chubby, round, and the soft parts dominate the bone system. The overall impression is one of softness and familiarity. Psyche. The spirit of the Moon men is lively, shining, and productive, but above all, dominates the imagination. The subjective sensations are more than the objective intrigue, and veil with him gladly the true nature. He follows his intuitive feelings, observes inaccurately, and is a superficial listener. Therefore, he is difficult to talk to and often shows an unreasonable persistence. Unable to damn the images coming from within, he easily becomes the victim of imaginary torments, of vain sorrows that torment and neglect him, wear him up, and possibly drive him to suicide. Heine. Thoughts are characterized by depth and originality, especially in literature and art. Writing plays a great role, the miraculous. Its nature is religious, or at least mountain-believing. Indulges and believes in the existence of invisible forces. In the main are the visionaries, somnambulians, psychics, doctors, mystics, to the great part of moon people. They are all the things that are dreaming, walking in Waldern, along water by moonlight, love reading and music. One special capture and understanding of works of art. They are interested in self-impairment. Therefore, the higher stages of this type possess special affinity for the culture of all branches of intelligence, sciences, literature, music, poetry, painting, etc. His sense for the invisible, it wrestles with himself that he possesses great intuition and hunches as well as. He speaks little, but writes elegant, balanced styles, consequent self-deprecation, but he can flee from his intuition and the subtlety in the handling of the word, this ability to use. The willed moon natures are weak, their courage significant, their softness gross. Digeringsstii are impermanent, capricious, and many of them often change their telling in their place of residence. Continued. Healing power of stones, metals, and amulets. 40. Von Robert Blum. According to our observations during the pendulum test, it turned out that the pendulum does not oscillate in the event of inattention, just as the lawful oscillation, according to the desire and will of the board, transformed into an unlawful one, or the pendulum can be brought to a standstill. Therefore it will now be understandable why among the participants in the séance room a harmonic, i.e., a one-centered mood, must prevail, and that the adverse thoughts and winches of every skeptic act as anti-suggestions, and the manifestations must be distracted or altogether prevented. Furthermore, the table, which is only a pure auxiliary and serves as an accumulator for the aura which drains the participants, is dispensable in a strong and harmonious circle, and the air, change, and object buckets become pregnant instead of the table with the aura. Quite similar to, for example, in a room in which smoke is heavy, the tobacco smell in the curtains and in the clothing present, and still some time later, intensely noticeable. If there is now a powerful medium in the circle, i.e. a person who in the passive state control-liber loses its aura or astral emanations completely, as in trance, then the conditions are thus given under which the conscious, semi-conscious, and unconscious astral beings, under the influence of a certain dominating will, to group together into a temporary organism endowed with intelligence and consciously to be wealthy. It is, however, excluded that in this grossly material lowest layer of the earthly astral light, on which the psychic phenomena usually play themselves in an average circle, higher intelligences, or even the saved, materialize, because these tank-souled deceased can, astral elemental beings, which affect the phenomena, are, in addition to earthbound souls, generally impersonal substances, spermatoid residues, and initial cosmic living beings, representing, as it were, the undeveloped spirit of matter. Foxes, gentleness of the lamb, cruelty of the tiger, etc., are represented. Moreover, human astral lighting material, the embryo surrounding ether body, is mechanically attracted by the aura of the growing human being, in the aggregate of its soul. And if Mr. Bloom, already high-ranking intelligencine in Geretata, should probably be cleaned, excluding souls, why should not lower intelligences, or still earthbound souls, not manifest themselves in séances? Pari passu with the development of the physical body in question. This process, which is normally decades in, it takes place in the séance room, where the uncontrolled psychic emanations and the aura des medium and derivable one, these elemental beings, in addition to gross matter, there are available, astralict, in a few seconds. Such a phantom gifted with consciousness and intelligence one is capable of attracting non-corresponding astral impulses to the aura material through the totality of the thoughts and winches of those present. but also in connection with the impulses of a deceased person, with any of the present, directly or indirectly rapport, and can guess its most secret thoughts and whines, like a mind reader or hypnotist in his subject. Or Oberesken auf den Wister dominating intelligence, the psychatus, deceased, so that they react to questions or special thought projection and corresponding to astral beings towards Albert. However, not the clear consciousness of that deceased cooperates decisively, but the same comes into consideration only as a general potency. 41 Truth, but always more or less unreliable. 1. Of course, visible and tangible materializations mentally in Germany, to the exceptions, and only and rarely all, in particularly strong media, can such phenomena take place. For the most part, these astral intelligences reveal themselves only through knocking, automatic writing, objects moved, or by speech, usually using the language organ of the medium in trance. The manifestation of the temporary intelligences lasts as long as the conditions suitable for their existence prevail, i.e., until the medium from the in. This way, the auric rays of those present and of the medium, which during the magnetization of a previously carried steel, again until Weyermann magnetized steel, some of the same remains in the room, and the object adheres and oscillates in large, wide-extended swirl rings, connected to the aura emanations of the medium and of the participants, in order at the next meeting, most of the members of the same astral substances. So, it is possible for the souls of the departed to be revealed. The editor. So, and better than before, according to the law of least resistance. Now, just as the room and the objects can be drunk, so to speak, intentionally with aura rays during a séance, so also the same unintentionally or spontaneously takes place under normal circumstances. And as a person dwells together in a room, or with the same objects for a longer or shorter time, and the more or less intensively the aura of emotions and thoughts is vibrated, the more or less space and objects are charged with it and remain interconnected thereby. Thus the aura vibrations of the stone, held in the hand of Pompey, release thought images of fire-breathing Venus. This explains the shattering of a mirror, of a painting glass, the stopping of a violent clock, or sudden death in a human being who had turned his attention to this object during his lifetime, his glance, his thoughts, by a repercussion of the intense change of the aura vibrations at death, which occurred in ecstasy. This is also the explanation of the haunting and ghost phenomena in certain houses or spaces. For example, a miser notices with horror in the dark night that a thief has crept into his room. Nameless, fearful, he hides the hidden gold, and the fear of the threateningly jagged dagger puts him in the secret hiding place of the highest ecstasy. He refuses to betray the thief's treasure and is murdered. The great excitement and the emotions of the murdered put their aura emanations into the most intense vibrations, which affect the hidden gold, the objects, and the surrounding. After years, the presence of a good medium or sensitive in the room of dark night provides the conditions and the necessary material for manifestation for the astral beings, who are exposing the murder scene in front of the horrified. The phantom of the miser, the medium or the sensitive appears, runs in supreme fear for the hidden gold, and betrays the hidden treasure. This is lifted, whereby the main element for generating the astral being is eliminated, and the haunted from this hour. Another example, a century ago, in flourishing youth, died the resident of a sudden unexpected death. At the hour of death were intense in the mountains. So often, the germs of a deadly disease or near imminent death in the case of death in the organism of a Schloss dweller, even if he has no ancestors, whose auronic vibrational demgemiforms, lie-like or related vibrations of the time, sympathetically attracted and mixed with it. Night. The rooms concerned, the conditions are given for the astral beings, the auric vibrations that were drawn 100 years ago in the hour of death, the material and the image for the phantom, and the Weihbeifrauch appears to the medium as safe. Nameless, imminent death. Auf diese Weise lassen sich such haunted stories and ghosts, wonderful explained salvations by phantoms, etc., in a casual manner, without sentimentality play any part. Whereas, none of the various theories of ghosts of the deceased, guardian angels, double-split personality, underconsciousness, telepathy, etc., withstand any scientific criticism. The main value of this explanatory lieutenant is that fundamentally all mystical phenomena are purely mechanical effects, mechanismist, not materialism. Our own knowledge that by bringing a table or other object with us, we can charge auric vibrations. Likewise, we know from the experiments with pendulum and with dowsing rod that we hand-release fluid through will and thought, and are capable of conferring a certain specific tendency. Then, a talisman with wicked winks and to impose thoughts, whereby the signs engraved on the stone in the symbols usually serve as auxiliaries to cheer on the invokes. The impulse oscillating, 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 oscillating. Now this talisman comes into the possession of an unsuspecting sensitive, such as the thieves-like thought projection of the winning fellow, are emanations of the present owner of the stone mixture. Thus the necessary favorable conditions are created, under which astral light magnetically attracted, correspondingly malicious. The Scriptures, 1, which we doubt very much. Mr. Blumoj once wrote D'Urville's The Fluidal Body of Living, the Scriptures humans and the Workaduprels study through. What does Mr. Sigaris say about this? The Guide, 1. In contrast, we are missing very energetic protests. Even in the simplest of problems, natural science admits that the purely mechanical explanation totally fails. And Mr. Bloom now wants to present all the mysterious and mystical phenomenal pure mechanical effects. Gewi Binine Tiganta cause can also produce mechanical effects or become more mechanical. But we are not interested in the secondary effects, phenomens and aids, but seek to come closer to the primary cause, the essence of all phenomena, and their materialism or the mechanistic explanation fails horribly. The Editor. The Guide 5. That is not right either. Zentralblatt for Occultismus, vi Yerg, if it is put into fear and into ecstasy by some imminent danger. 43. Just one example for illustration, in which high-grade the tendant are emanation and Steinibus may be modeled in the smallest detail. It was years ago in San Francisco when we, Dr. E., Dr. R. and I, just beginning our studies in occultism. Dr. E. was returned from Guatemala, where on a few days from the capital the settlement visited the numerous Mayan monuments there. Day of the ride trip, at the farewell Maya curiosities made for a gift, among them a small, funky talisman on a ring on which Dr. E. Denselby immediately attached himself to the primordial chain as an appendage, despite being warned of the fateful, especially in the presence of four-footers, dangerous influencing. Dr. E. traveled with 2 riding and 2 packing animals, took the talisman from his original chain and packed it in his suitcase, brought it out again on his arrival in San Francisco to show it to us, Dr. R. and me. Dr. R. offered to wear the same on his original chain, and Dr. R. E. Dauberly B. smiled at the talisman. When we met Dr. R.'s apartment the following evening, he had already taken the talisman off and already handed it packed to our friend Dr. E. In the night Twarensigner private office and broke, and some of his most valuable instruments were stolen. And when he was in the peace of his elegant coupe, of 2 fiery, and then he ran. When he got out of the house, the horses shied away, and the coachman lost the same violent thieves. 7 runners threw and came to fall. Both were injured, and the coupe was seriously damaged. Whether that was coincidence or not, no one dared to wear the talisman any more, and expose himself to even more accidents. It is analogous with glick-producing amulets, and very similar with so-called healing stones, in which the purely mechanical, only very few diseases are cured of self-allopathic reactions of the drugs. And even in the case of the homeopathic healing procedure, it becomes apparent that we find it necessary to assume, for explaining the healing successes of drugs used in the enormous evaporation, that the latter, in the state of the so-called radiating matter, W. Crookes, or of energy, East Forest, Guslebon, among others, are missing, so that such a cure, the interaction between the physiological activities determining the well-being of the human organism and the subtle radiations of the ingredients dependent on the healing power contained in the medicaments, whereby the abnormal vibrations predominant in the system causing the disease occur upon encounter with the externally similar vibrations. Vibrations are neutralized because the same from opposite in the direction of coming forces cancel each other out. Hence, similia similibus. This makes it significant that we are as good as contraria contraris. Such traps of healing successes have to do with etheric radiations, electrons, or one or more different Indi category of Pranagahorigan modifications of force. How the same characteristics, chemism, electricity, magnetism, warm, light life force as, and ode, the synthesis of all these force modifications forming a sunbeam. Hence the healing effect of the sunbathers, which, however, but, if we can only take, as long as the sun shines, so far, embodiments quite in the range of possibility, somehow a medically indifferent body or object, according to occult scientific principles, with certain Spagian and odd magnetically acquired ingredients. 1. Impragniran Hambling, for radiating the essential healing emanations, stimulating N-Dizadan direct in das Grobe reception center, Astral. And then the sun enters, so we have a healing process created, eating past before all others, without 44 further ado. In fact, it's true allopathy, or jumping into the eyes. Homeopathic treatment, the doses taken with effects are quickly cursed and completely fail at night. Prepared healing streams, the beneficial radiations, dem rationally stone by day and by night, in order to be permanent by their equal extent, the healing power of nature, to the mildest and but powerful most vigorous, to support and demand the efforts of the physician in the treatment of his patient in every way, until the abnormal last the vibrations in the body are normal again. Radiation of the healing stone, but the effects cease. Unopportune consequences can never be spoken of under these circumstances, as is so often the case with other healing methods and means, and namely the poisons introduced by Osoder subcutaneously, which are to eradicate the harmful bacilli and disease substances, at the same time also attack healthy juices and organs, and cause disorders, which are often worse than the disease to be combated. More clear and clearer than Herr Mr. Bloom has the Wessender Homeopathy Prof. Dr. Gustav Jägerin of his writing, The Homeopathy Wissenschaftlich, expounded. See also Occult Medicine by G. W. Surya, Publishing House by Max Altman. The Scriptures, Leipzig, to whom every practical healing disciple will miss. 14. Practical Psychometry, from Praktarzt, G. Reinhardt. Continued. Buchan's first experiments. When Professor Buchanan was in New York in 1842, he made the closer acquaintance of a bishop from the Episcopal Church named Polk, who demonstrated to him his peculiar sensitivity. Polk could, even at night, distinguish from each other only by their use objects of metal. He had a metal taste on the tongue, which showed itself differently depending on the metal that was touched. Buchanan decided to pride himself on whether other people also possessed this peculiar sensitivity. He did not limit himself to metal objects, but still took strong-tasting substances to help: sugar, salt, pepper, acids, etc. Many investigators had, in addition to a slight sentient pulling arm in the head, in fact exact taste sensations, depending on the type of person who laid the tongue, only in smaller portions. Buchanan was from the beginning, when he approached his experiments, to proceed objectively, purely objectively. He writes Daraber, page 18. I can state that my experiments have always been completely independent of magnetic, mesmeristic influences of a suggestive nature, non-artistically induced hypnosis and somnambulism. Despite this assurance of great objectivity, opponents of occultism have later asserted that psychometric phenomena were based on suggestion, i.e., self-suggestion. However, this possibility must be added. At the time of the first psychometric experiments, the scientific world had no knowledge of auto-hypnosis and auto-suggestion, self-sleep and self-sleep. self-influence. According to his entire scientific character, Buchanan had also thought of this in such extended safety regulations. Real experts of the work's BS, however, have given him none of the new sciences can pre-create. The one-size-fits-all of Buchanan's psychometry, that it only arrives on the results and the method, whether or not suggestion happens, is indifferent. On the contrary, it is just expedient to quickly arrive at psychometric practice, to apply good suggestion demanding psychometricians. To show the way more accurately, I think the way that B. Freeher has gone, in detail, must be wise. Since two or more people always influence each other, the law effect of psyche on psyche, so is natural Officer B.S. Einfluss auf the course of the experimental importance. Since even at that time only Ma Big was psychometrically inclined, he to a certain extent blunted the sensation of his subjects, and actually had the sword of success, degree of sensitivity, brought by seeking to make the psychometric experimental logic burst probabilities. Our logicist of the occult standpoint is also partly a suggestion, but the suggestion of materialism. The fixed conception, in the desire that the experiment should be carried out in the prescribed manner, was necessary also for a subject. The authority of these academic teachers Enob was only useful, and also the arrangement that a large number of people experimented. Effective mass suggestory is just as great as the mass suggestions of the freer public hypnotists and suggestors. Subsequently, B experimented under much harsher conditions, even with individuals who had withstood the sharpest control. B immediately achieved by his inspection arrangements that the half, at least 1/4, only rarely where experimental psychometry could be used. Innovon 10 or 15 personal. The place in place also depends on the greater or lesser spiritual, moral, and, in order to achieve goals faster, corporal subtlety of the participants. In addition, he later found out that the conduction of an electric current through a medicinal product can cause a partial dissolution of effective components. A person who is involved in these, if the circuit is switched on, medicinal substances are absorbed. At the time of Psychometry, therefore, there is a form, chemical effect, veramente Buchanan's waren diese elektrolytische Gazette still not known. By the way, the forwarding of substances through electric Hohaus is known from the first days of the influence machine. Tension already. Ottermensch also uses high-voltage electric current permanently, so this high voltage comes into effect as soon as a test involves a powerful drug application. The use of paper, as Buchanan first prescribed, offers no obstacle to the human high-voltage current. Glass is tried to isolate animal electricity, but in vain. Hen resistance. We are therefore permitted in the first psychometric attempts by Buchan to accept a principled error, quite apart from the inadequate application of the laws of suggestion and autosuggestion. In this note lies no reproach. Essential of the many examples of the fact that supersensible psychic is more and more restricted by the progressive scientific knowledge. One-on-one separation of the psychic and sensuous in the psychometry is now difficult to find. These facts, which prove to be very important in practice, become paperingroberer wide-ranging. Professor Buchanan has several minutes of his psychometric sessions recorded on page 21 of his manual, reproducing a copy of such, Cincinnati, January 1849. The undersigned, Studienendum Eclectic Medical Institute, in the Internal Medical Department, at the instigation of Professor Buchanan's, participated in an experiment. Wire with the hands short time, approximately 5 to 20 minutes, different drugs in paper envelope. They made us unrecognizable. Antibiotics, we were able to prove here that these agents produce similar effects on the organism as otherwise in the usual method of their application. There are 43 signatures. To this somewhat lean and little proven protocol, Sutz Buchanan adds the necessary explanations himself, and let it be. The effects of the investigated means were sometimes so strong that the investigators had to abort the experiment so as not to be too drastic to be influenced by drugs. For example, causes a drug much used in America as an emetic, lobelia, tendency to vomit. In the above-mentioned experiment, only about 80 people participated, which yields a percentage of 50. Buchanan had. Through such experiments, many doctors were instructed to deal with psychometrics, which at the same time possess good psychometric abilities. Among others, some members of the professorial college of his faculty, Professor Hill, Professor Sherwood, Professor Vaughan, Professor Gatchell, Professor King, and others. Professor Buchanan, by the way, as he himself mentions, has considered the possibility that the chemical substances of the drugs were effective by absorption by the skin. Therefore, in all of his Verdammt die Haut not dau verkampte. On the basis of these experiments with chemical agents, as noted above, imperfect experiments with chemical agents, the emanation of the human body correspond to Mrs. the psychometer human emanation sensation as radiations of dead chemical substances. This also gives the word psychometry. It means measure with psychiatrics, invisible is part of man. But the spirit can most easily understand the essence of the same thing and apply the abstab to itself. Philosophists have meant that man can only understand non-species to the extent that he can manipulate these things for himself. He only comprehends the suggestion which is exemplified by the external psyche of his psyche. Why Object-Hearted's work on man is a second-order question. Monism assumes a uniform force, inherent in all things, from the cosmos to the finest molecules or electrons, which is the special trap of the psychometric reason for psychometric knowledge of outside conditions. It is at any rate practically advantageous that the aspiring psychometer does not form theories for itself, but rather seeks above all to collect practical questions. After this reflection, B.B. left his sensitives their hands. It only required some attention that the typical symptoms of the disease were pounded on one's own body. Buchanan himself, who from the outset was not sensuar, well integrated into this method of disease diagnosis. Such examinations can stretch for several minutes, because then the symptoms of the disease burden him too much. In psychometric practice, learns to avoid these evil conditions. In my opinion, especially by 47 good lifts, since the rectangular excursions of a sick person, especially an acutely ill person, are inhaled without examination. This probably corresponds to the majority of cases of the usual contagion of a disease on the healthy. The psychometer gets in the course of its many bouts a fine sense of smell, if he did not already have it, so that he can guard against contagions by strong disease of apparitions. Sensitive and sensitive psychometer exchange, Serpern, distinguish the different activities of the individual organs. Laid their hands on the area of the lungs, the stomach, the over, the kidneys, etc. In this way the boundaries of the individual organs can be determined even without undressing the body, but also different activities. A sick organ also gives one of the healthy different impression, which can only be practiced, and a man must then be up and not demonstrated. Gaedan's psychometer can leave. Imalipersonal experience, Imeinen a Beichten die Freiser and Magnetopathentis, method of sampling, and Professor Jaeger holds that every magnetopath must have this ability of illolens, if he has at all good results, or wants to have the most success. Since Buchanan was a sensitive psychologist, he tried quite logically to have the individual parts of the human head scanned methodically. Example of Gall, the different pest areas, directly living. We therefore call the psychometric pest investigation an experimental phrenology. A more precise description of the results achieved with it will be made later. Here the first one will be flown at them. When afterwards a psychometer brought the forehead of a person, he felt in stimulation of his intellectual powers, corresponding to the seat of the intelligence, at this point of the head. A pleasant, soothing impression was perceived from the upper head. To the upper head, the phrenology known moral. Thus Buchanan was able to ascertain still further districts of individual faculties through the various psychometric incitements. In fact, the psychic incitement of perception is best communicated, of course according to the degree of psychic development of the individual. Finally, the head did not need to be directly transferred. It sufficed to approach the hands, or to move the individual head parts with a metal object, or a spring. That also a radiance of mental intrigues on worn. It was thus possible to infer from letters the mental, moral, and intellectual state of a person. In the following, the course of such a letter, sub-1 psychometric search, and an exact instruction should first be described. Examinations are given at all. Continued. Protected healing methods against snake bib and biff of great animals. Collected and communicated by G.W. Surya. Continued. The day seems now to have come when we give the thinking part of humanity a sharp, but also justified, criticism of Pasteur's preventive vaccination and the usual smallpox vaccination on the basis of more recent scientific research can give. Precisely in order to prove that these much vaunted healing and protective means not only do not fulfill their purpose, but unfortunately represent a source of systematic popular contamination, the scope of which, so far, only a few insightful, enlightened doctors have recognized, but to work on the abolition of which is the duty of every human friend. 48. Already the ruder-mentioned Dr. Heuser smelled out the view that Pasteur's successes are usually based on the fact that our patient has been bitten by a dog, but by no angry Hunde. This would still be the least judgment in the wonderful Erge Pasteursund. But how if it could be proved that those Enchen who were bitten by dogs who were not angry, and out of fear prevention were injected with Pasteur's remedy, then where were damage to health, under certain circumstances, even killed, did the vaccine fail? Such pitfalling non-indie public or are this interpreted, for example, as individual failures presented, and the Che falls asleep again. The easily credible audience then weighs itself with certainty, and if somewhere a great dog bites a series of Utten, the relevant daily newspaper at the same time reports in a comforting manner that the bitten people were carried over immediately after the next Pasteurentut, which is to say that these people can meet in peace of their recovery, thanks to the Advanced Medical Institute. Unfortunately, this is not the case. The National Antiviral Purge in London has earned the great merit, which in all one Pasteurchen in der Erde spite, the preceding Hutzempfung occurred demonstrable death trap on Asserche from the years 1885 to 1905 to compile and publish in a special list. The first of these lists appeared on 20 September 1898 and included 90 death trap. Another list with 1,220 death traps was issued on January 1, 1901, and grew up on January 1, 1903, according to the third-party listworthy death trap ready on 1857. The fourth list runs until 1 January 1905. There are 2,209 death cases. For the sake of lack of space, we can only bring a recent case out of the press. It wrote the Ostdeutsche Rundschau, Osterblatt, M29, April 1911 as follows. Despite protective vaccination of rabies, died. From Friedeck, 28 dm. At the beginning of April, the brother of the legendary owner Karl Kolar, Nas Kolar, was bitten by a dog suspected of rage. The dog was destroyed. Ignaz Kolar traveled to Vienna to undergo the vaccination here. On Wednesday, the 19th century, Ignaz Kolar came from Vienna, where he had been in the Hutzempfungsanstalt Gegenwut, in the Rudolf Spitalenack, Vertierimpfen, zu diem in observation. According to Friedeck, apparently already ill. Rick on Saturday he had to be handed over to Andas Städtische Krankenhaus. During the next day, paralysis and disturbances of knowledge occurred, and yesterday morning, Ignaz Kolar died. And these are by no means superficial lists. The source is given, and as these reports are to be found in all or in most medical libraries, it is not difficult to find the richness of the information given here. The federal government against the vivisection in Österreich, Sitz Graz, has now purchased the entire still existing stock of these lists, Verlag Bermüller, Berlin, and thus intends to share at first all those doctors who have signed the memorandum to the Reichsrat on the slogan of the vivisection question. Most doctors probably have no idea what an evil Pasteur and his successors have done with their rabies serum and still do. As we hear, the federal leadership just mentioned will use the rest of these lists for further propaganda purposes, in particular from members of parliaments and the government. This conspicuously large number of death traps, despite successful prescriptive preventive vaccination with Pasteur's rabies serum Lapner II interpretations, distribute its efficacy, either must be added, so that rabies serum many traps, where people were really bitten by great animals, failed then very insecure medium, and all such immediately to be used, as soon as insuring agent becomes known. Or the rabies serum has the effect of its uncertainty in the even more dangerous property that persons who were bitten by animals who were not pronounced rabies and who were vaccinated with the rabies serum for the sake of safety first delivered to death. Then such a midnatal is doubly reprehensible. And now our esteemed readers may let the reports the prompt efficacy and harmlessness of the Spirea Omeria once again be drawn forward before their spiritual eyes. In view of these hidden facts observed by practical doctors with regard to the extraordinary healing power of the Spirea Omeria against the terrible water-fearing, non-direct crime of mankind, is it to be called that such a first-class remedy has not long been disseminated in all cultural states? We leave it to the own judgment of our readers why the effect of the Spirea Omeritae was silenced. But whoever sees these lines fulfills his wish. On request, the Confederation Against the Vivisection in Österreich, seat of Graz, is happy to provide interested parties with individual copies of these lists. Send knowledge and propaganda. Only if you want to send any voluntary contribution, also in brands, to partially cover the purchase and shipping costs. Dr. Kuhnen and Sorge dafür, da be in the interest of the threatened Anschheit, im Interesset Verwahren, Heilkunst von jetzt an the Spirea Omeria. And also the other remedies against rabies indicated here. It Mehrfall der Vergessenheit. However, called representatives of the medicine under their becoming, find it to take up really preserved means in their healing treasure, because too simple, too little scientific, and perhaps too cheap. So the writer of these lines, players to all true folk formers and oaks teachers, to the naturopathy associations, to the opponents of vaccination, as well as all occultists in the white direction, who strive to help themselves to victory on all the offering truthfulness and humanity to Enon. No longer to let loose, until such means become common property of all Elbe-standing thinking people, and are available in every village to the threatened. On the other hand, the bitten about the safety and danger of the protective vaccination with the pastors. Then the day will soon come when they will be cleared. Your pasteurization institute's lack of use on the part of the population, which in the last annual report of their efficacy is diplomatically ripped out, were allowed to be locked. We do not weep for the abolition of such common institutions. They will be recognized in future times by a true error, which is regrettable in lay science. What has been said here about rabies serum therapy applies, as we now want to prove in initial sentences, also to the whole of Myrna serum therapy and of every protective vaccination, as it usually is today. If there were some or less lay people who used vaccination and serum therapy, then it is as a significant sign of progress to begriben that now also known doctors have the courage to harden the previous attacks of the layman, wissenschaftlich unumstößlich. 50. These medically demanded on a daily basis research results, also ours, to advance knowledge, and at the same time to take and invalidate the present work, was not seriously built up to the same non-scientific base. Since now the whole vaccination, medical serum therapy, since the introduction of protective pox vaccination as a cure method, to be more and more rotten man from the side of the anti-progress school doctors, to win the lantern precisely through the gross, undeniable successes of the Kutzpox vaccination, also for healing serum therapy, so müssen wir zur Esteinwenig die Schutzpock-Impfung, in the light of true and sincere medical research, more perhaps than all learned treatises and long-winded ones already, fact that they have the right to do so. The following prize competition could not be achieved until today. In the year 1910, several German papers were published, e.g., in the Hallische Nachrichten contest, published, Who proves until January 1st, 1911, scientifically correct, that the so-called protective pox vaccination, 1, is a safe means of protection against smallpox, 2, has no health problems as a consequence, 2 conditions, without which the vaccination is senseless and criminal, 100,000 mark, in words, 100,000 marks, 10,000 marks each from the undersigned, Dr. Med Bachim, Frankfurt am Main. Sanitätsrat, Dr. Med Bilfinger, Sanatorium Elisabethenberg in Lorch near Stuttgart. Post Assistant Cotter, Kaldenkirchen. Commercial Counselor Ludowici, München. Senior Teacher Miras, Dortmund. Professor Dr. Molinar, Starnberg. Dr. Med Rascher, München. Dr. Med Voigt, Frankfurt am. Engineer Wegener, Sachsenhausen. Bergischer Impfgegnerverein Elberfeld. This is also true Iberein, that Professor Dr. Pott, Halle ADS, shown in 1892 in the Therapeutische Monatliche Notes. An eradication of infectious diseases and epidemics will never achieve through the protective vaccination. Until now, the vaccination has been able to eliminate neither smallpox nor smallpox, a task which is reserved for healthcare. Were the protective pox vaccination really the ideal protection against smallpox epidemics? How would it then be possible, 1871 and 1872 Europe, despite vaccination and revaccination, so severe leaf epidemics broke out? 1871, about 30,000 people, of which 29,000 were vaccinated, partly once, partly twice. Yes, in Proben, Starben in 1871, 60,000, und im Jahre 1872, Evengar 64,000, human and in Blattern, despite the vaccination obligation there for 50 years. If we do not err, this competition was increased with significant prices repeatedly. Of course, no one could win this contest, which is why finds the patient reader discusses below. In red light treatment, associated with appropriate internal means, e.g. homeopathic remedies or spasioric remedies according to Dr. Zimpel, and proper diet, we have enough weapons according to proven practitioners to be able to fight smallpox really successfully. But what about the claims of the medical authorities? There is no concealed fact which speaks for a late influence on the health of man. Well, this assertion, as can be seen from the petition of the Association MPF Gegnerischer Dortste, February 1912, to the German Reichstag, concerning the convocation of an impartial commission for a renewed investigation of the MPFF Raj, which has become absolutely necessary, is simply a lie. We quote from this: following the petition, as early as 1872, an official survey of a city on the Rhine was found that 50 children who were vaccinated by an apparently quite healthy child were ill with all several severe syphilis. This is a disease, among all circumstances, an ordinarily detrimental influence not only on the health of these children, but also for that of their parents, who were thereby severely engulfed, as well as subsequent generational questions. Impermanence brings about something incredible. Also in Köln in 1849, as Colonel Spohr reports, several hundred children had become syphilitically ill, and already some years after the entry into force of the German vaccination law, State Councillor Dr. Medvalls, Frankfurt ADO, as he testified sworn in court, was able to establish that in Liebes, AO, an Ohr Mädchenschuhe, 25 12-jährig Mädchen, were also infected by revaccination. The same statutory result was obtained 425 Kindern after Linzelregen. In diesem Falle, Lerdings diaktigen die Erkrankung, abhemist only, as impetigo contagiosa. The transmission of the same by vaccination did not adversely affect the healthy needed children. Naturally, the orthodoxy of vaccination was aimed at countering such fatal occurrences of publicity as far as possible. In addition, in the early 1980s, the direct mating from person to person and conceived the animal mating by taking the lymph instead of vaccinated children from vaccinated calves. Now it was said that in this animal lymph, one had found not only a safe, but above all an absolutely indistinguishable protective agent, that the absolute Inwanfrei was. However, the transmission of vaccine syphilis is rarer, but the other damages, many with a dead end, have become omitted. K.K. saw himself the Proben Reichsregierung already few years after DT-eric lymph was generally used, forcing, in a secret decree of 5 September 1888, to announce to the foreign governments that Proben has appeared in the last preceding years in hundreds of children in connection with vaccination, a poisonous rash, impetigo contagiosa. Although there are also severe traps and mortal, the outcome was not missing. The disease is pre-communicate in different limb circles as a result of vaccination. Calves which were found healthy at the veterinary examination and at the slaughter following vaccination. Where is the fractured absolute imperfection of the animal lymph? It was also no longer possible with this accumulated number of official determined most severe vaccinations to make the already enough plagued parents responsible. No, the poisonous nature of the vaccine lymph was unquestionably guilty of this, and with this fact the circumstance is completely correct that Dr. Med Landmann, the head of the bacteriological department in Frankfurt am, at the 67th meeting of naturalists in Lübeck, a detailed and in-depth report on the often toxic quality-related vaccine lymph varieties. The same was stated by the professors Dr. Levi and Reimburst, Dr. Fickler in Strasbourg, Dr. von Nieben in Wiesbaden, among others, and the many vaccine damages and vaccination deaths confirmed by doctors, which have been unequivocally established to this day, ensure by experience that these serious bacteriological findings are completely correct. To be continued. Again, Theosophy and Scientific Occultism, von Mk 52. After I have continued to walk along theosophical paths in order to get acquainted with possibility, after having visited the Theosophical Congress in Magdeburg and heard there a most important theosophical writer, Herr Dr. Franz Hartmann, I can formulate my intricacies über Theosophy as follows. Today's Theosophy, which has created a visible body in the Theosophical Society, does not depend on establishing an infallible philosophical system. It is, all wash I noticed, in their goals quite consider religion. The Theosophical Society seeks its main task in to stimulate the members of religion, i.e. relations with the invisible, to cultivate and develop the world of the mind within itself, by continually and repeatedly pointing out that the basis and cause of all, he created the all-embracing God spiritualist, and that only man has the ability to become aware of this God spirit in himself as an individual being. The Theosophist's most noble goal is the penetration and distribution of his four lower principles, Rupa, Prana, Kama, Kama Manas, through the higher trinity, Atma, Buddhi, Buddhi Manas. The spirit in man should draw the soul up to itself, and united with it, form a spiritual, impermanent individuality, delve the delusion of multiplicity, of separateness, of egoism, which Hooter the Quick has wounded. Franz Hartmann. Not on the struggle for self-defeating images of Goths, nor on the dispute of the rightfulness of these authoritarians, nor on the belief in the existential Tibetan depths or the authenticity of occult phenomena, and also not on the fact of the theories laid down in the secret doctrine, but on his knowledge of the unity and omnipresence of God in all chops and phenomena, is based the Theosophy and the harmony of society, which Blavatsky found that. With such a Theosophy, one can well agree. What Hartmann teaches is mysticism in the broadest sense. Gnosis, i.e. knowledge, apart from the one all-encompassing knowledge, renounces. The mystic in his sense does not need the embroidery of human knowledge and science, for the highest wisdom, which has created everything, fills him completely with its light. The path that leads to this light is an unwanted one. One smokes only according to the divine laws of love, justice, to live in mercy, then it becomes self-evident. I believe that this is also a general Christian point of view. The path taken by the Indian Theosophist, the yogi, to achieve a goal of consciousness and oneness with the omni-spiritual revival, is a substantially different one than that of the Christian. It is the path of knowledge, as opposed to the path of devotion. Franz Hartmann, among the adepts, the practical theosophist of the Indian direction, does all the work. He does not lay the sphere of the mind, kama manas, unoccupied, like the Christian devout, but seeks to penetrate from below, making the unconditional lawfulness of the visible and invisible world, karma, on the basis of the teachings of his masters, and possibly also on the basis of his own spiritual vision clear. On the basis of this intellectual knowledge, he now also seeks to stimulate his higher spiritual principles to action. then find the ground prepared, and the entanglements of kama manas, the mind, have become insubstantial. Thus in Indian theosophy, we see religion as the goal. The next way to the goal is philosophy. If, however, the Shiler, in his struggle for intellectual knowledge, finds such theories as those in my previous work is characterized, so it can be in the case of existing own judgment abilities, that he loses confidence in his teachers and the way of knowledge. The way of devotion, i.e., the immediate elevation of the highest spiritual principles to divinity on the way of the believing prayer, is also perhaps simpler and easier. The devout Christian also finds a cheering and loving personal ideal in the person of Christ, which Theosophy probably in vain, through the knowledge of laws in the world, all the people will seek to replace. Also, the strong emphasis on his inner divinity through Theosophy suggests the thought that a grandiose spiritual pride is then gained in man, if he is not held down by his own bitter experiences of his own human schist, simply unreceives him for the effect of the Logos. I believe that the strong emphasis on the necessity of divine grace on the weak man by the Christianity corresponds more to the actual interests of the people, and also to the actual human relations. This is not to say, of course, that the doctrine of the inner divinity of man is false. Loss from above, which is powerless without striving from below. Very true in Goethe's Faust. Gerrit Steinittel's The Ghost World of Bosnians. Whoever strives, we can save him. The beautiful results obtained by Mr. Surya in his thankful and impeccable experiments with the Kilner spectacle screens are also the sensual processes of prayer. They have strengthened their faith and instilled trust in the faithful prayer. For one, the neglect of understanding in the affirmation of his religious disposition causes complaints. For the other, not. Then he decides to do both. Objective. One must admit that the Theosophy of Indian origin meets a profound concern of modern man with a profound knowledge of science. Therefore, ecclesiastical Christianity would do well not to despise the results of scientific occultism, but to make use of them. In any case, Theosophy has all the reason to keep the path of knowledge free from deterrent, irrational theories. If my previous work contributes to it, it has its purpose. According to Dr. Franz Hartmann, the development of inner senses should not be sought at all. It is welcome only as a result of a consecrated life. Thus, the emphasis is on the Theosophia of religion, and not on philosophy. As a religion, however, it is also dogmatic, because the highest things cannot be explained intellectually, and here the dogma enters into its right. The pantheistic conception of the divinity, as it meets us in Theosophy, is a dogma, a belief, to which the practical successes of the adepts are certainly certain. The truth is the truth. In contrast to Theosophy, scientific occultism in the sense of Duprel is to be described as pure natural science, to which religious goals are at first completely distant. To interpret the results, and possibly to make them useful for his religious views of his species. The sure achievements of scientific occultism should be recommended mainly to the Theosophical Schiller in his Treading the Path of Knowledge. The Revelation of a Soul, by A. V. Ulrich. We and Vogahart did not come here. Only so much should be said. By the Schillereinisch Hohenmeisters Gewennen, after I had thrown down the earthly Hille. I stood next to him and expected his further instruction. With this view, Hartmann distances himself from the theosophical direction of Indian origin and approaches the Christian mystics, whom he has also studied, Grindlich. Central Journal of Occultism, VI. You are open to the rest of the earth's mishals in the spirit realm, but if you are willing to work farther for humanity, you may also at once incorporate yourself. The latter was my answer. Well done. But you must know that the time has not yet come for the work that will be yours. You choose this life of the blessed in the spirit realm. You cannot descend at the necessary time. You must dwell until your term has expired. If you want to work, you must be born and die early and reappear in time. As quickly as my first answer came, so slowly came the second. 55. Body of the little child, to the sufferings that the mind endures, if it does not find expression in the instruments of the child's body. And I should endure this without the hope of gradually making this instrument subject to me. My master smiled sadly. Yes, this is not easy, but not only this must you endure. This is equally imposed on all men. Du moops noch sonderleiden, corporalish leiden, in this short consolidation, so that more of your karma is worn away, and you can more easily and less prevent the later task. Well, it was, I cried, in order later to work as I should, and win, I'd gladly take on the weight. It took some time for the master to lead me to where I was to be born, where the conditions of suffering were to be fulfilled. At last, the house and mother were found, and he brought me to a richly furnished room, in which there was a elegant young lady who nestled tenderly to a young officer. You love me so much that I can count on you not to leave me if I wish your wishes, she said tenderly, looking up at him. How can you doubt it? And I stayed in the house near the girl. My eye was to become a mother, and sought to infuse her better and higher thoughts. But I seldom succeeded, for she was always with the thoughts of herself, and her lover were occupied. Also there were disputes and reproaches in the house, when it was noticed that she would become a mother. All this was so hard for me to bear, and I must stay there, because I was magnetically tied to the young mother, and almost always remained near her. I lost my senses, and when I became aware of myself again, the little body which was now mine fell asleep in a remote part of the house. The small body, to which I was unequivocal. Henceforth I could only have had this little body asleep. And how heavy was this consciousness! I floated in my sleeping form, as the mother of the maiden entity accompaniment of a woman of the people. She gave the brute hand of this woman, and drew some gold into her hand. Bring me this shame out of the house, and no one must hear from where and by whom this child was born. And the woman took me, and carried me to the railway. I slept and did not suffer, for I was warmly enveloped. So I thought how all this had happened. Before I was born, I had often heard how my father tried to obtain permission to marry, how it was impossible for him to find the necessary sum, for he was very young an officer, and in the country of my birth, a low rank must succumb to a large sum as a deposit in order to obtain permission for marriage. The father of my mother seemed to be very rich. The household required great expenses, and therefore he claimed that he could not do without such a large sum. So I came to the universal illegitimate child. I have not become a parent, nor do I wink to explore it, although my unliberated soul could do it. My suffering began only when I was in the house of the raw woman to whom I was entrusted. The house was dirty, narrow, and filled with children, whose clamorousness also frightened slumber, the slumber that conscious my soul of the only I was hungry. I was hungry, the moment, ate and lay helpless, until at last a good lady had compassion on her misery, and advised the woman, who was little known to her, to take me to Findle House, also gave the money for the trip. Again, I was carried to the railway, suffered hunger and cold, and again, in hunger, cold, and dirt, because in the Foundle House they did not want to receive me, because no written proofs of my existence templates. After some time the same torments came to me again. Once again I had to travel with the raw woman, but no longer to the house of discovery. It had found itself a merciful soul who wanted to accept mine. The woman gave me loving hands, which carried me gently, but warily helped so badly, that my little members, I lost mich halb, from corporlos and reutemisch, that now the eradication of suffering, and the frivolous death, which had been told me before, now occurred. But the loving hands did not allow this. They awakened me to life, and to further agony. For the first time there was a recovery for the tired body. He must receive some strength to be able to suffer further. The merciful soul who took care of me was known to me from a more peaceful life. She had to pay me a debt, and tried to eradicate it honestly. But she did not succeed, for I had become Yavr Corportin to suffer. My recovery time lasted 2 weeks. A woman from the Volga had received me, warmed my half-stiffened limbs, gave me food, and at the same time, when I was asleep and self-conscious, I found myself in a warm atmosphere. Husband and wife loved each other, and both loved their 2 children, the youngest of whom shared his cradle with me. My body lacked nothing. The lady who took care of me provided for clothes and for the funds to feed me. Time. A nurse was sought for me, and at last she was found. And now the torment began again. The woman, my nurse, hardly cared about me at all. I was almost completely the custody of her 5 children's leave, who kept on cleanliness, but often lodged me starving. I did not suffer cold anymore, because the tired body had not endured this anymore, but hunger and bad treatment. The lady who took care of me saw me rarely. Also a few other people came to visit me, and all wondered about the expression of my eyes. Such beautiful eyes I never saw on a child. I hoarded from all sides. The people did not know. They always remained the same. After more than a month in the disgusting room where the mother, my so-called nurse, romped, the children squabbling, and the father returned drunk at night from the work home, came a better. My little body suffered terribly under this aura of strife and alcohol, and it was already so when my carpenter picked me up, and I fresh air my soul tried to make my shooter noticeable, but I only succeeded in part. I was taken to the Findle house, and gave to other women. On the other day they took me to the chapel. My carpenter was a godfather, and I became my Christ, consecrated by baptism. For a moment it seemed to me, 57, as if my soul felt itself through the body. For a moment I was myself. Then everything became dark again. Again I had to return to the disgusting home, and the agony continued. But when I slept, I listened, that at the end of the month, my first loving caretaker thought to take me again. Thought did me well, but I forgave that I was born to suffer, and that I myself in this willingness. The month was at an end. Tomorrow redemption was to come upon me, and it came, but in a different form than I expected. It was holiday, and the man came home late at night heavily drunk. The female bugged and screamed. I slept and lived frightfully under this scene. Suddenly my body woke up in frenzied pain. What happened? I don't know, only that I screamed as loud as my weak body was in condition. Had I been hit by a blow which was fire-related? Maybe. Doch ich war's Paten, de Nacht und das Weib, would not die. Neighbors would arouse such children's cry, so as not to get into bad repute, and drick tea a pillow on my mouth. A wandering's body, the breath passed away, and I was lost. Quietly I moved to a carpenter, who believed me in good care. It was early in the morning, and she sat and drew shirts for me. I flirted with her soul how much I suffered, and a frightful restlessness seized her. She knew now that she had been mistaken in the choice of nurse, and was making a pretense. Then it rang, and they brought her my little corpse into the house, for quite a lot of money. She gave what she could, and mourned for me. Now she sits at the desk, and I dictate to her the telling of the short life in the pen, the automatic font, by Joseph Peter, Colonel A.D. The ability to write automatically is not uncommon, and it is an erroneous belief that the phenomenon can only occur in hysterical persons show, though cannot be denied that it occurs more easily in the latter than in healthy and completely normal persons. Unfortunately, we have no evidence to judge from the outset whether a person is suitable for generating the automatic font or not. The simplest method consists in taking a pencil or a pencil by hand, and without a stiff, rigid posture, with the arm comfortably placed, taking the position for writing. And in most cases, many such attempts are required, which should never proceed beyond the time of 15 to 20 minutes, since otherwise there will be a mitigation which will lead to the occurrence of the article in July 1912, Our Sheet, to the Death, Williams, T. Steads, by Ludwig Deinhard, has rounded up the much controversial problem of automatic writing again in current form. Therefore, the above publication of our all-round esteemed employee, Mr. Oberst A.D. J. Peter, is certainly contemporary. The editor. 58 Phantomos is a hindrance. In the case of the suitable people, initially appear confused lines, snorkels and straight lines, which soon merge into eye strokes, until finally it comes to writing words and sentences. In some cases, a result is achieved more quickly if one uses a planchette, especially if several persons lay their hands on the same at the same time. But this procedure is more laborious, and rarely provides the fluid writing of the medium writing solely with the pen. Automatic writing is one of the most interesting phenomena, which is especially weird to a serious scientific inquiry, since it allows us to gain insight into the realm of that unconscious which has so much share in the whole phenomenology of occultism. Insights which have failed us in full vigilance consciousness. Here we find with amazement that this underconscious is an independent individuality, endowed with its own will, is capable of contemplating, and with one in the content of memory which is by far the same as that of the watchful ego. Moreover, this wide-ranging personality in man possesses abilities which are not customarily peculiar to the conscious human being, such as television, mind-reading, introspection, i.e. knowledge of the diseases of the organism, and knowledge of the healing means, etc. Personality is the individual soul of the human being, which he describes as a transcendental subject. In this transcendental subject, we undoubtedly miss. The main source is to search for automatic writing appearing utterances, and precisely because of the above-mentioned properties, also when the communications on transcendental capabilities are closed. Now the question arises, is the transcendental subject the only agent of automatic writing? This question must be negated, for if the unconscious man is also attributed the great majority of the trap, then there remains a remnant which necessarily indicates the cooperation of a foreign agent, e.g., the spirit of the unconscious man. That this is possible is not difficult to see. Of a disincarnate, everyone who knows the phenomenon of direct transfer of thought can be affected by the agent without the use of his body. It can also be affected without the possession of a body. Provided then that there are pure spirits, which I do not believe, or at least spirits without visible material bodies, which I do believe, suggestions can also proceed from these, which like all suggestions are not visible. C. Duprel, The Discovery of the Soul, IBD, Verlag von Max Altmann, Leipzig. The Discovery of the Soul, 1 volume, page 218. Actions, so also in the action of automatic writing. But if the soul survives the death of the organic body, then the same will apply to it, which has just been said to the spirits. Yea, Prell is of the opinion that the soul, after separation from the spirit, body suggestions will be much easier to give than a hypnotist can. The said researcher says, the whole transcendental psychology proves, and also the automatic writing has confirmed it, that we are in the innermost part of our being, namely, as transcendental subjects, as latent for our consciousness as well. Lifetime is what is commonly called a ghost. So we actually introduced the physical existence at the same time. Hence we already enter into the spirit realm during life, whose members are undoubtedly in such a relationship with each other as the members of the human community. It is unthinkable that the souls as psychic atoms should lead an isolated existence. If, however, they are nipped together, then the living gratitude could very well be the language of the spirits, and could more easily receive suggestions from the deceased, because, if direct intercourse were not possible, they could be mediated by our transcendental subject. These are also, I believe, the reasons why even living ones appear as agents in the rallies of automatic writing, as is so often the case. It does not matter whether the living person is aware of the suggestion that he carries, or more frequently, knows nothing of the process. Frederick Myers, the author of Human Personality, also comes to the above 4 sources of automatically written messages, namely, first, the source in the psyche of the medium itself, whereby the contents are taken either from the usual memory or from the dramatization of that of the unconscious, subliminal. The message, i.e., the assignment to a spirit other than that of the medium. In these cases, the subject matter is like the dramatization of dreams and hypnotic suggestion. Second, the source in the mind of another still living person. The message is inspired by a disincarnated intelligence. Third, there are attributed to evil spirits communications and also the manifestations of good spirits, leaders, protective spirits, etc. In the previous case, it is also possible that the message is from the spirit of the deceased. Frederick Myers emphasizes that he is firmly convinced that the greatest part of the messages, the effects of the subliminal work of the mind of the subject alone must be attributed. However, a certain number of the rallies also want this researcher to be tricked into the other sources. It is clear, says Myers, that the messages, the content of which gives facts which the automaton knows or claims to know, can have their origin only in the medium's mind. On the contrary, however, is not equally correct. Messages that give facts which the automaton does not know do not necessarily have to take their contents from another mind. If the subliminal eye is capable of acquiring supernormal knowledge, it can lead to this result by other means, through telepathic impression on the part of a foreign mind. Alone, even in the view of Myers, there is still a large number of traps in which it is very difficult. Between the hypothesis of cryptomnesia, i.e. the subliminal, the deeper one searches, the more the evidence becomes piled in favor of an influence or telepathic action from outside. The more difficult it becomes to limit the problem to the activity of the subliminal self of the automaton. How difficult, how almost impossible it is to find an experimentum crucis, i.e., an irrefutable proof for the source of intelligence, which manifests itself in automatic writing, has Professor O.D. Lodge in the well-known proceedings incoming shown. He points out the difficulty of specifying the meaning of identity at all, and further recalls the fact that it is those who communicate, as can easily be pinned down in the utterances of the living, mostly know nothing of the process. But since the living person who communicates cannot be conscious of the fact that he has dictated the writing, the deceased person also needs to be conscious of himself, that he is active. It is therefore conceivable that the hand of the automaton may be influenced by a non-transitory part of the mind, conscious of a foreign spirit, living or disincarnated, but, for example, by its underconscious or dreaming part. So do not infer that they themselves necessarily know of the thing, nor that their consciousness has anything to do with it. It has something to do. This theory complicates the matter enormously, of course. Professor Lodge considers it as complete, that a community of the mind, or the possibility of an exchange of thoughts, exists from a distance, or through unilateral reception of thoughts. I dare to say, writes the scholar, that persons who without any hypothesis deny the naked fact as I wish it to be presented are simply ignorant. You have the Proceedings of the SFP's Volume X, 1894. They are not compelled, but all the dogmatic denial, research, if they do not want to commit such persons, becomes a disgrace, not for the so ignorantly denied phenomena, but for themselves, the raffled and biased deniers. A question that is often raised is, how does the foreign agent persevere? We do not know, but it seems that he either takes possession of the passive hand of the medium and resigns himself to writing, or that he is subject to suggestion, which translates into writing. If the medium is nothing of what it writes, the first-named form is given, i.e. partial possession. But if the writing medium knows the content during the writing, then this is in proof that suggestion is available. Trance. They are very often fully awake, and it is then entirely decided whether the message arises from the underconscious or comes from a foreign agent, for in both cases it turns out to be. If the writing takes place in the somnambulous state, so as to tool, it is no less difficult to know the source, for most of the time the medium does not see anything of what it writes, and we are faced with an old question. It is most likely to be inferred from a foreign agent. Children who cannot write act as media, or come communications, which lie entirely outside the circle of ideas of the medium, and also its abilities far meet. There are thoughts, but the form of the manifestation is determined by the medium according to its individuality. Inspiration can still be present when the medium writes in its mother language, which becomes unknown to the supposed agent during his lifetime only var, and probably still is. Because in the transmission of thought, he is carrying thought as such, not the word sound. If he addresses a somnambule in a language that is foreign to him, but familiar to him, because it depends only on the transmission of the thought, nabhangig from the wording. But if the agent of a numb language unknown, as well as the somnambulist speaks only papaganabig, a command written down by a person present, he does not understand. As I said, it is clear from everything that it is extremely difficult to determine whether a foreign agent is involved or not. Duprel, The Discovery of the Soul, BDIS 225. 61. Because the underconscious self is equipped with supranormal abilities. Therefore, in summary, we can only say that the action of a foreign agent is probably, I do not claim, is to be assumed if 1. The content conditioned the circle of representation and the capabilities of the medium proceeds considerably. 2. If a prophecy is given which is fulfilled. 3. If things are communicated which only the non-present communicator can know. 4. If the announcement takes place in foreign language and scripture. If the communication in style is completely similar to that of the alleged communicator. If the scripture reproduces the manuscript of the communicator. When the medium carries out an occupation besides writing, and his thinking takes up completely. When the medium with both hands simultaneously writes, and either dies with each hand in another typeface or even in another language. When writing media that cannot write at all. All these traps can be proven by many examples. The discovery of the soul, that anyone interested in occult studies, cannot be recommended enough. To Die Myheft 1912, mentioned allegation of poet Nella Doria Cambon. We will take from the foregoing explanations that there is no doubt the possibility that a foreign agent has arranged those communications. This possibility increases even to probability, if Ma considers that, as you observe Prel, deliberate exchange between two halves is at least more difficult to assume than between two halves. It is an old experience that separate beings, communicating ghost non-rare leagues, often harmless and joking, and in many cases, but also in such obvious malice, the intention is that they are unwillingly given the designation daemon. Who will deny the possibility that among the spirits of deceased men there are those who are still afflicted with the evil senses and passions which they possess in earthly life, and who will finally prove that there are not still spiritual beings other than living or decorated human beings who make themselves invisible in occult phenomena. Therefore, for all those who want these phenomena prifen, or are accidentally familiar with them, the first rule must be, carefully prifen of case to fall, and never be deprived of the guidance of our healthy human reason. To be continued. Occult Look Around. The president of the National Spiritualist Association, Dr. George B. Warren, writes in The Progressive Thinker, Chicago, April 27, 1912. A very interesting event at the annual celebration, which the First Spiritualist Association in Washington, D.C., on the evening of March 31st, was the most successful meeting chaired by PLO A. Keeler in Washington. The gathering seeks a weekly committee of 3 non-participants to bring their own slates and at the meeting to exercise control in their own discretion. Senator Owen's brother, a man in an outstanding position and sharp, as one of the masters was disabled, he sent his wife in his place. This lady and the 2 gentlemen moved into an anteroom with Keeler Urich and cleaned about 20 pairs of slates after they had been examined sorgültig. All slates were brought by the committee and by members, none by Keeler. After the committee had messed up the main hall and all the boards, which had 62, not existed from the Heims, had bound together in pairs, Keckler requested about 15 media to come to the latiorm in front of each pair. After he had clairvoyantly given some descriptions, which were recognized as correct, the committee and others hoarded the intoxication of writing, and of Keeler's request open to anyone who had a few tablets in his hand. On bis on quadruple or finfaller tablet-written messages and names. For some, the manuscript is said to have been the exact facsimile of the manuscript which was given out as intelligence. The committee and the assembly had witnessed that a previous treatment of the table or a supposition was not possible. In writing with invisible ink or with chemicals, while purifying, for example, may be refined, was under the eyes of the committee members non-mogj. Experienced spiritualists declare that this achievement was one of the most extraordinary that they had ever experienced. See such a mass of communications, insofar as time and conditions arise, and indeed, from many different persons. What do Messrs. Reinhold Gerling, Leo Eriksson, etc., say about this? These learners will, of course, not be embarrassed by an answer. Oithenbar studiasels Amerikar humbug. For what could come from America elsewhere vieben humbug. As a few years ago, from America, the news came to Europe. The Wright brothers had flown a round twist of an hour's duration. Then outstanding European scholars and engineers did not hesitate to call this news a humbug. Today, all the states of Europe compete for the production of flying machines, which have the achievements of Wright's fear. The case of Mib Orm, aber a memorable process B, which has found its end in Calcutta, is reported to the BLIV.